Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us here today for IAB Europe's Virtual Programmatic Day. My name is David Goddard and I'm Double Verify's Senior Director of Business Development, responsible for expanding partnerships with digital media and technology companies. I'm also the chair of IAB Europe's Programmatic Trading Committee, a multi-stakeholder group that aims to increase the understanding of programmatic ecosystem, the impact it's having on the digital advertising, and influence the industry via initiatives. As most of you all know, IAB Europe is the European level association for digital marketing and advertising ecosystem. Through its membership of national IABs and media, technology and marketing companies, its mission is to lead political representation and promote industry collaboration. One of the ways we do that is by bringing people together through virtual events. One such initiative is the IAB Europe's Virtual Programmatic Day, which I want to thank you all for joining. I also want to highlight that IAB Europe and I are very grateful to our sponsors for this event, AdColony and OneTrust Preference Choice, who have helped make this event possible. We can confidently say that Virtual Programmatic Day is one of the largest events, virtual events, in not just the programmatic industry, but the digital advertising industry. And unlike many other virtual events, this is not pre-recorded. We are live. So thank you all so much for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us today. We'll make sure we reward you with a fantastic event. So today we have a stellar lineup of moderators and panelists across 4 sessions that will discuss everything from the programmatic landscape in Europe, the evolution of programmatic advertising in a post-third-party cookie world, to what programmatic trading means to advertisers today, and data protection and policy for the programmatic advertising industry. All of the speakers you'll be hearing from today are members of IAB Europe. We're very fortunate to have the very best leaders in our industry take part in our events and join in on initiatives. So if you would like more information about how you can get involved in future events or on IAB Europe membership, please contact Helen or Lauren. Now, before we kick off, we'd love to know who is joining us from across Europe and beyond today. So please let us know what stakeholder group you belong to by taking part in our poll. And as if by magic, here it is on your screen. I just also would love to ask if you are responding as other, because we always have a nice sizable portion of people as other, please let us know in the chat box what, if you are other, you are, whether it's a student or from another industry, etc. We would love to know. Whilst you complete the poll, I also wanted to highlight that we want to encourage audience participation throughout the event. Each panel will be followed by an audience Q&A. So if you have any questions for today's panelists, you will be pleased to know that you can submit them in the Q&A box at the bottom of the Zoom window during the panel. In addition to the poll you've just completed, we'll also be launching a few audience polls to ascertain your opinion on specific topics throughout the event. So thank you all in advance for your participation in those. And thank you for completing the poll. The results are in, and I always say in with a question mark at the end because I'm waiting for them to pop up on the screen. There we go, fantastic. So brilliant, 4% advertisers, agencies, 21%, ad tech, 37%, publishers, 27%, welcome all. Media and press, 1%, welcome, and other. Again, if you're other, please do let us know where you are. I'm always conscious that we do this poll right at the start because we do have so many people jumping in and out, so these figures will change. But again, thank you very much for joining and sharing which group you're in. Now on to our first session, a keynote presentation from Daniel Knapp, Chief Economist at IAB, and he's going to be talking about or talking on the subject of the European programmatic advertising landscape. So over to you, Daniel.
Thank you very much, David, and a very warm welcome from me as well. It is a special day to talk about programmatic in numerous regards. Number one, we've come out of Q1 2021, so we have a much better reading on not just how 2020 has shaped up, this seminal year, but also how programmatic growth is going to continue this year. Today is the 1-year anniversary of the kind of ISBA PwC study on the programmatic supply chain, so a very good moment to open up discussions about trust in programmatic and the future of this supply chain, how can move from supply to really a value-added chain. And lastly, we are just in the final preparations of releasing our ADX benchmark study, which will come out at Interact, our flagship annual conference on the 23rd of May. And I'm very pleased to be able to do a little bit of a sneak preview and share some first aggregated numbers on the value and the size of programmatic. Those numbers will be refined by the end of the month, but you are the first audience to actually get a glimpse of those numbers. So I very much look forward to that. I want to give you a overview of the programmatic landscape today and walk through some of kind of key topics that are structuring the programmatic landscape, which the successive panels on this day will explore in more detail. So join me on a bit of a whistle-stop tour. I think it's pretty clear that 2020 was a terrible year, but it wasn't as bad as expected. Here we can see in Europe the monthly spend of different digital and then also other media ad formats in aggregate throughout the year. And you can see it wasn't a horrible year, it was a horrible second quarter. And if we look at the initial predictions of 2020, they were doom and gloom. We expected the worst ad recession in the history of the last 100 years, worse than the financial crisis and worse than the Great Depression in 1929 and 1930. But this didn't happen. And if you look at the other media line, which was struggling to return to growth overall in Europe and throughout the year, we can see that the digital ad formats overall made a healthy rebound starting June, July. I've illustrated here the programmatic line, the dotted line, and you can see a kind of remarkable curve. You can see how programmatic fell off a cliff in March. April was the worst month, but we saw then a return to growth already in June with a very strong fourth quarter. December a little bit weaker than November, just because we saw a lot of pent-up demand as stores were opening, plus Christmas shopping culminating in November, and then a kind of a shorter month in kind of December with new lockdowns coming into place. I think the important thing here to remember is programmatic was one of the earliest mechanisms to be affected by the pandemic because of the switch on, switch off nature of programmatic. It could be, in particular in the open auction, switched off immediately. So that looked bad initially, but it came as an advantage of programmatic as the year progressed. Because we saw, and there were some SEC filings from some ad tech companies about this, that as the year progressed, there ceased to be a correlation between local lockdowns and decline in ad spend. And what was a problem for programmatic in the first phase, as everybody was uncertain how to navigate this environment, became a strength afterwards, because advertisers realized if they ramped up programmatic again when conditions improved, they had the confidence of doing so because they could switch it off again if conditions should worsen. So we saw kind of a very tactical behavior of advertisers take hold as they learned how to navigate the pandemic, and programmatic was a key mechanism of giving them the confidence of increasing media spend as the year progressed. So how does this look like in terms of overall spend in Europe? Here's a sneak preview. We could see that the European programmatic ad market, no one would have believed it at the beginning of 2020, actually grew double-digit this year. Now, we expect, final figures, as I said, 24th of May, around a 26 billion euro market for programmatic in the widest sense in 2020. What do I mean with widest sense? We have 27 IABs contributing to our annual study, and there are probably as many definitions of programmatic as there are markets. Nothing is easy in programmatic. But there are two broad strands. And one is, let's include everything in programmatic that is not search, but automated. That includes also walled gardens where no external DSPs can go into, includes social, for instance. That's one definition, the wide definition. And others say no. In order to really understand the market dynamics, we need to look at the kind of open internet and just look at spend, for instance, transacted via the open RTB protocol. And we need a narrower definition of the market. At IAB Europe, we are a very consensual organization, and we try to cater to all needs and demands. And here is your view if we exclude social, if we exclude walled gardens that you cannot buy through a third-party DSP. So we see a smaller market, but a market that also grew healthily with just a 10.1% growth. This is good news, as we expect the overall digital ad market in Europe to have grown by around about 4.5% in 2020. So the transaction mechanisms subsumed under programmatic, auction-based and deal-based, fixed price-based, they both grew in excess of the market. And we'll speak later in this forum today about, in a sense, the programmatization of everything, of all media becoming programmatic. A good example of the kind of rapid maturing of programmatic is video. So we now expect in Europe that around nearly kind of 2/3 of all video spend. And that includes everything from outstream to in-stream, from broadcaster video on demand to YouTube and other services. It grew healthily, and it is now the default of buying and selling video advertising. Video in 2020 was in a sense, a tale of two objectives. First, in the first half, we saw performance-driven video grow despite the pandemic. Short-termism prevailed, but in particular, as we saw many new companies starting that needed to sell, they needed to both sell and build brand. And therefore performance through audiovisual imagery. So therefore performance-based video was a great tool to do that as the world shifted to an e-commerce model. But as the economy kind of returned, we saw also the return of brand advertising in H2. And in particular, programmatic video was fueled by the fact that many of the industry categories that were heavily exposed to the recession in 08, 09, particularly FMCG companies, that weren't hit that hard by COVID-19 in terms of revenue. So we saw big advertisers, Mondelez, P&G, and others actually ramp up their overall media spend and also doubling down on digital. And this was kind of in the second half, including, for instance, insurance and finance spend, which was driving brand video. The streaming revolution clearly helped, and video, again, is an animal of many, many different shapes and colors. And included in here is, as much as we can, also CTV, where we can see programmatic models being a tiny minority yet, but both guaranteed and biddable mechanisms are growing, particularly on device UI, banner overlays, but they're also coming into other formats. It will take a while in Europe. We had our virtual connected TV day just last week, but it's a good sign that more premium formats are becoming part of the programmatic ecosystem. Of course, this ecosystem is changing rapidly, and we're seeing the deprecation of third-party cookies. It's hard, though, to really put a value on how these third-party cookies have enabled or are kind of fundamental to the world of programmatic. Different studies come to different results. Some say, in a very small sample, it's a bit biased, not representative of the entire market, that it didn't really help much to use third-party cookie, particularly behavioral data. But others say it's quite the contrary. It has been a major driver. So even today, 10 years on, there isn't the one single conclusive evidence of the value that was delivered or the value, because we need to assess now what value we're losing. The good news is we're developing in terms of finding new ways of addressability for the programmatic world. The key thing to remember is that this new world will be built on many pillars. And who adopts these pillars and how they will be orchestrated together or separately is going to co-determine how fast programmatic is going to grow and which transaction models and which vendors in that space are going to win. We have everything from logged in users, which is authenticated clear identity of a shared IDs, still identity, to segments we already move into aggregates, to then flocks and then contextual. So many, many different ways of identifying, of classification in a sense, that programmatic has to deal with. But this is as much a challenge as it is an opportunity for innovation. And sometimes in the industry discussions that I see, which are very technical and highly constructive, I think we often lose sight of the fact that advertisers follow eyeballs, and no matter which model prevails, spend in digital and responsive interactive spend programmatically is going to continue to grow. We just have to find out how exactly and who is going to win in this world. First-party data is becoming increasingly relevant in this world. And I try to illustrate here, it's just a very schematic illustration, but which sectors so far are better positioned to take advantage of first-party data based on how close somebody is to the consumer transaction. And the good news is we can see, we take the US as a proxy just here, that the largest section of digital spend, retail, also sits very close to the consumer. Some sectors are still undecided in a sense, it varies company by company, but overall you can see a lot of sectors that are very strong in digital have the potential to develop very strong first-party data assets, which is good news for the future of programmatic. We're going to see a much faster reallocation in this new world come 2021 of spend, and namely where media, data, and attention really intersect. I tend to show this slide here or this chart here a lot because there's so much in there to unpack. If you look at the communications segment here, which includes PR but predominantly paid media, you can see across all media, it's fairly flat, mainly a redistribution game, but other things come in. Experience, commerce, and technology are all part of marketing. And if you look at the future world of first-party data, we can see that these growth areas are also locations of negotiation, where experience is where the consumer value exchange takes place. Commerce is a great location for first-party data and partnerships. Technology, a great way to fuse, to enrich, and so forth, in particular, if we think of the rise of data clean rooms at the moment. And that means new growth for programmatic and digital media in general. I think in several sections, retail media is going to grow rapidly. We see, of course, the walled gardens continuing to grow, but also new addressable media. Could be esports and gaming, connected TV, and so forth, in particular brand environments. And there's a huge chance, at least for, in particular, tier one publishers with first-party data assets on the sell side to win in this world as well. The jury isn't out, but these are potentials that the market can tap into. A key issue, and I mentioned it at the beginning, is the notion of transparency in programmatic. But let me say that transparency has always been a topic in all media and not something specific to programmatic. So when we think, for instance, about a seminal presentation in the US from an ANA by John Mandel, he talked about kickbacks in the US. And this was referring to all media, not specifically digital. And these deals are typical in other parts of the world because how clients remunerate agencies. So cultural questions, etc., fuel in there. We had a big study on transparency, again, in all media, sparked by this presentation in a way, where programmatic was just a small part of the discussion. But then we had, for instance, a lot of investment in an intention on the programmatic value chain, but a company or companies that were pioneering this shut out their doors due to lack of demand. We then saw an explosion of interest with the ISBA PwC study that many of you are aware of. We saw also the CMA moving into this, mainly from a competition and potentially antitrust perspective. And now we got a new ANA study. The RFP just came out just last week to look at specifically the programmatic value chain. Interestingly, in all of this is that how questions about what transparency is and what the programmatic value chain should deliver have completely changed. It moved from just financial audit to contract locations to what's the business model of programmatic, how can the media value of programmatic be maximized, working media, what about fraud, how can we use the chain to optimize, what is the competition in programmatic, and how can programmatic be used to fight disinformation? So many questions are being superimposed now on programmatic infrastructure. Issues that programmatic has to solve or issues that programmatic has the potential to contribute to. So both challenge and positive sentiment. Complexity remains a key component of the supply chain. Here is 25 advertisers. Part of them were, or part of the ISBA PwC study, where we did an analysis based on one publisher, and you can see over 1 year, the distinct number of supply paths that there are. So there's a lot of potential for cleanup, and the supply chain remains highly fragmented. But we call it from bug to feature. with complexity comes opportunity, in particular to optimize chains. So here, for instance, have two chains, how that would look like, and you can really see the complexity from advertiser left to publisher on the right. And now SPO has been the call of the day for a long time now. Question is, what is SPO? How can we really take advantage of it? And how can we move it, as Tom Kershaw said, from a manual to an automated process? If we do this, we can really help convert the supply chain into a value chain, namely value add. And we have good news. We've got more controls through standards, through files. And also the discussion is changing. Moving away from fees, saying fees are bad, that's not the case anymore, but what are the outcomes? Fees can be good if they deliver superior media outcomes. In particular, when we look at in-housing, when we look at outcome-based buying, we see a complete change in how the programmatic supply chain is being evaluated. Increasingly, we see a fragmentation of the chain as well. We see new, in particular, premium channels come in with proprietary DSPs and so forth. So in the future, I predict there's going to be more orchestration of distinct separate value chains than this one messy chain. And lastly, we have now more, in particular post-cookie, more ways to experiment and test and adapt to find the right patterns in the chain. Let me conclude with a view on what the future holds, in particular, the burgeoning e-commerce opportunity. I think a key thing in this world is that we have always thought of a marketing funnel. And there's a great presentation by Luma that introduced the concept of the cylinder. So how addressable media, walled garden, but also programmatic, can increase efficiency, scale, and efficiency at the end by reducing what goes into the funnel and maximizing what comes out. So reshaping it into a cylinder. And this is, I think, a key issue, in particular, when we look at the cost structure in e-commerce, where if you look at this waterfall here in the middle, services, general, and administration here, this bucket 25 to 35% of the overall costs, this is something that's highly flexible. So 10% range, and marketing goes in here. So anything that can be done in digital advertising and in programmatic, in this case, to actually reduce the cost here can increase the overall EBITDA margin of e-commerce. So this is a great news and a great task for the industry to take on. And lastly, I think I mentioned already retail media. We all have seen the explosion of Amazon, but now we're seeing many retailers adapting programmatic models to take the kind of conventional supermarket trading agreements into the digital realm, either building proprietary and white label solutions or partnering with programmatic specialists. So beyond the usual formats of CTV, audio, digital out of home that's being programmaticized, we also see this new area of retail fueling the future growth of programmatic. And with that, I would like to conclude my little overview, my whistle-stop tour, and pass back to David. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniel, for that fascinating look into the European programmatic advertising landscape. I'm now delighted to say that IAB Europe has brought together a panel of industry leaders and experts from its Programmatic Trading Committee to explore the state of the programmatic advertising landscape and ecosystem. Our moderator for this is Lisa, and Lisa is also my longtime colleague at IAB Europe's Programmatic Trading Committee. She's also the Director of Advertiser Solutions for Pubmatic. Now, don't forget you can submit your questions using the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen. We'll review the questions and put a selection of them to the panel at the end of the session. But I'm happy to say over to you, Lisa, for this exciting panel.
Thanks so much, David. And thank you, Daniel, for that great presentation. So let's kick straight off. And I wanted to have each panelist introduce themselves and let me know if you agree or disagree with the trends Daniel presented. We assume most of you will agree. So if you do, which stat or fact resonated the most with you? Steve, I'll go over to you.
Okay, thank you, Lisa, and hello, everyone. My name is Steve Wing. I work for a company called Magnite. For those of you who aren't familiar with Magnite, we're the largest independent supply-side platform for all channels and formats. So we were originally created combining the reach and scale of Rubicon Project with the connected TV expertise and technology of Talaria. As of last week, when we closed out our acquisition of SpotX, we're absolutely thrilled to have such a talented team join our company. And that helps us on both fronts, both the programmatic reach and scale, as well as video, CTV, expertise and tech. So it's probably, Lisa, no surprise that the stat that's called out, I mean, all of it makes sense. I'm never going to not like a better than anticipated growth in programmatic advertising. But the stat that probably turned out most for me was around growth around programmatic video. And I think Daniel referenced it around the streaming revolution, which I think everyone's familiar with, but what we saw last year in a change in how consumers consume more content, and specifically on the big screen, has been very profound. And there's lots of research studies that have covered this. We did one across the EU top 5, and it showed that CTV or connected TV, it's mainstream, most people are watching it weekly. It's changing. There's a preference around streaming that sets it apart from linear, and it's also very open for advertising. So the value exchange that Daniel alluded to in return for reduced cost or a free service. So I would go with that bit for the time being.
Thanks so much, Steve. So Gregor, over to you.
Yeah, hi everyone. Hi Lisa. My name is Gregor Fellner. I'm located here in Hamburg and working for Rakuten Advertising. Rakuten Advertising make all the Rakuten properties available through the programmatic pipes, mainly Rakuten TV, but also Rakuten Viber and Rakuten Wiki. And the most resonating stat that I've seen in Daniel's presentation was actually also the second slide, where programmatic video surpassed other digital media and becoming one of the biggest programmatic channels after social. And I think this is a trend that will prevail. So I can second Stephen on this, but also seeing the identity solutions that are coming up and the activities that all the e-commerce players, and Rakuten is one of them, have deployed over the past month and years. So this is also, of course, speaking, from my personal view, something that Rakuten puts in a very good position going forward, as we have a Rakuten ecosystem with a unified ID and a lot of e-commerce data.
Great, thanks, Gregor. Nicola, over to you.
Everyone, I'm Nicola Bevan. I'm the MD for Operations from Xaxis EMEA. So we are GroupM's programmatic arm. So we work and support with great clients across GroupM to deliver great outcomes for clients. So I think, first of all, I wanted to thank Daniel for the presentation. It was really insightful as usual. And I'd agree with all of the themes that he discussed. I think a couple that popped out for me, I think video growth, I think everyone can recognise that from the past year, if not before. One of the pieces that resonate for me is the switch from just focusing on supply chain, but to actually the value chain, because really what's important for clients and what they're looking to achieve is like the business outcomes. So if there's a fee involved and it delivers a superior service, then it's worth paying for if it delivers that outcome. And then I think the other piece as well, which I think Gregor and Steve both mentioned, is I think understanding first party data is a priority, and it should be for all clients. And I'd really encourage people to kind of be proactive, start testing the new solutions as and when they come available. And just make sure that we're all kind of working towards preparing for that change in the industry.
Thanks so much. And Andreas, last but not least.
Hi everyone, yeah, Andreas Dooley. I head up sales for Oracle Advertising across EMEA. The two main brands, or the two core solutions that sit under that, would be Moat and Moat measurement. But the area that I focus on specifically is our contextual intelligence products, which are more recognizable as what would be Grapeshot specifically. Yeah, look, agree with everyone's points as well, and thank you to Daniel again. One interesting thing I thought was actually after all years in ad tech and media, that a funnel was always on a slide, and will that now move to a cylinder? It'd be really, really interesting. First party for sure. I'm really glad that there was a nod to context somewhere in that presentation. I think there's certainly an interesting piece around a diversification of kind of strategy and tactics as we move into the new world. And I think it won't be one particular solution that is the magic formula, but it will be a specific array of solutions that meet people's criteria. The other last piece is just this piece around consumer behavior change, which I think we'll probably get into a little bit in our conversation as well.
Great. Thanks, everyone. We've known that there's been growth this year, but it had started off as a turbulent year with the pandemic and preparing for the new post-third-party cookie era. What are some of the other challenges or barriers you've seen this year, and how have you overcome these? Steve, did you want to start?
I'll kick off. Yeah. So I think, I mean, I would just reflect, obviously, I think we'll come on and talk about a world post third-party cookie, but I think it's worth just reflecting. It's not a classic headwind because ourselves and so many other companies have achieved such extraordinary things in the last year, but working, onboarding, recruiting, developing culture, building companies, hitting numbers, working with our partners to deliver great outcomes, doing all of that while working from home from over a year, depending on where you are in the world and certainly where you are in different bits of EMEA, I think we shouldn't underestimate how surprising some of the success has been and how amazing lots of teams have responded to it, but also has to look at that as something that's been a challenge in many different areas. And I hope we come to talk a bit more about talent development during that period. I think for me, I'm always looking at turning things into a positive. So again, we'd look at the kind of how do you capitalize on the actual, Daniel showed in his, as usual, excellent presentation, very compelling slides around growth and the growth specifically around video, but also mentioned, the growth in biddable and programmatic CTV, but from a small base. So how do we grow adoption in line with the kind of the changes that we've seen in consumer adoption to enable faster, quicker, larger investments? So I think tackling issues such as fragmentation, measurement, attribution to help solve some of that, to help advertising grow, investment in line with those changes has been a big part of this year, both as an individual company, but collectively as an industry. And I think that allows us the opportunity to try and take what is a unique market and give it the justice in terms of the opportunity that it presents to us. And just a quick shout out to the IAB Europe while I'm here, because that would make sense. If you are interested in the unique characteristics of connected TV and EMEA specifically, so opportunities, challenges, market constituents, the guide that came out last week, the IAB Guide to Programmatic Opportunity in CTV, which many people on this panel have contributed to, it's really, really good. So that'd be me. I think let's not underestimate the impact on people. I think it's been fantastic, but for me, how do we turn some of the challenges and obstacles to investment in one of the newest and fastest growing sectors of our market?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I suppose I can add to some of that. I would also say that the last year, midst of pandemic, there's been just general unpredictability as well for planning and activation of programmatic. And I think what was easily predictable, forecastable yesterday kind of went out of the window. So general planning cycles and execution. When you think in the midst of a pandemic, we left Europe, there was a US presidential election, social and racial movements as well, like Black Lives Matter, an increase in deep fakes, in fake news, and just rapidly changing kind of news cycles. I think that's definitely one piece. The second would be add that to the fact that everyone has been at home, we've been in lockdown, consumer behavior, and I think Daniel's kind of suggested some of that as well, as consumer behavior has got turned upside down too, which has just meant the usual ways that clients, advertisers, agencies would go about their operations to target consumers had to be reinvented on the spot. I think that was certainly a challenge and a flag for sure. And that's a nod to e-commerce too, I suppose, and the rise to e-commerce that we saw from Daniel. And then lastly, it's the bedding in of legislation. I think we've really seen the maturity of kind of GDPR coming through and privacy first coming through as well. And that's probably left another big question on if what I'm doing today, is that going to work tomorrow? And that's this kind of search for the formula for the new ecosystem. And I think lucky enough for us at Oracle, contextual intelligence has kind of been more relevant than ever because of that. So we've been really, really pleased that we've been able to ongoing keep supporting our agencies and brands because of that uncertainty to really kind of nail or expose custom brand suitability and really think about their choices as well. I think as Nicola suggested before, there is choices, and let's think about those choices, test and learn to really find out what's working for us in the new world.
And I think this is a very good positive spirit, right? About choices and test and learn. I think also adding to what you just said, the insecurity of the past year, but also the beginning of this year, also paid into programmatic as a channel. Because you could, with hands on keyboard, react quite fast to all the developments that you just described. And I think that's just another plus for having programmatic channels available and being very flexible and can react on all these trends.
So I think from my perspective, I think the pandemic really sped up advertisers' demand for outcome-driven solutions, and they've really wanted to extract the maximum value from the budgets that they've got available. So I think one of the things that's been quite important for us this year is to make sure that we're guiding and selecting the right channels, the right campaign types and KPIs, to make sure that advertisers are achieving the results that they want now, but also in the future. And I think one thing that's been an interesting observation, which kind of I think Daniel did touch upon, is that it doesn't necessarily mean getting the same for less. It means getting kind of the maximum value from the budget that they have. So kind of overachieving and really delivering value from there. And I think if we look a bit more internally, I think one thing that everyone probably globally can recognise is that we've had to adapt our approach to supporting our people. Programmatic is a really fast-paced kind of industry. There's always new things. We always need to educate our teams. So that's been like a really big focus, and adapting how we train, how we onboard, the innovation forums that we've run. I think we've put a lot of energy and effort into these things, and we've actually found that it's been really successful. It's created actually new opportunities. I think today potentially is also another good example of that, because I think we probably do have people here today on the webinar that maybe wouldn't have been able to join if it was a kind of event in person. So I think it's definitely been a kind of a brilliant learning experience for everybody.
Thanks so much, everyone. I definitely agree with those statements. So just following on from Nicola's comments about talent development and retention this year, does the panel have any additional comments on how the pandemic working environment has actually impacted this?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with Nicola on the internal perspective. So at the best of times, certainly in a world of digital programmatic, training, developing, onboarding the best talent to do the best things is always a challenge in its own right. So having to kind of manage running your business, and in our case, we were actually, merging company, creating a new business, whilst, exploring and benefiting from the growth that Daniel alluded to towards the back end of the year. So again, changing that approach to be really focused on how do you train people, how do you develop, how do you check back on that, how do you give them access to development opportunities if you're a relatively flat company, how do you try and involve more people more often? Because obviously we all work remotely, and that level of atomization makes it difficult to foster that sense of culture and community and the usual things that would go with working in your different offices. So I think that kind of, how do you create collective experiences to enable people to develop their careers better? A lot of how we would normally focus stuff is in the outside world, so through events like this where you get to meet people, listen to people. That's changed. And then there's the external view where, we've continued to support, been a long time supporter of things like Bricks and Finishing School, which is aimed at underrepresented 18 to 25-year-olds who have been disproportionately hit by the pandemic in terms of opportunities to get into our industry. So I think it's that mix of what can you do internally that nourishes and develops and is mindful of the kind of work-life balance for people. And we've had to do things differently and we've made some mistakes. And I apologize now for everyone I've onboarded during this. It's not perfect, and we'll get there. Hopefully we won't need to, but I'll just say that on record. I apologize. It's not been as good as it possibly could be. We're learning. I think all of us are learning. And I think the external view, we forget that there are impacts outside of our own companies to the people we want to have represent a wider, more diverse industry. And we need to work extra hard to bring them back into the fold.
Yeah, so even I think getting talent to our industry and on board talent is also a very interesting aspect, which will be I think also impacted by the pandemic. When you look at Germany, we have buyers all over the place. It's not like all the buyers agencies and trading desks are located in London, and it was always a question: okay, where do we open up offices? Where do we attract people? And I think this is now really changed. This has changed with the pandemic, so we are more flexible. That being said, it's still the wealth of face-to-face meeting is now even more evident. So we are looking at different recruiting strategies also to involve the groups that you just mentioned, which were underprivileged during the pandemic. And I think this is also a very important aspect, although we talk about machines and programmatic and algorithms here, not to undermine the human aspect also in the recruiting.
Yeah, I think we're all learning, aren't we, Gregor and Steve? I think certainly agree with everything we've said about kind of just a consciousness of internal development, looking after the people that are in our businesses now, whether that be through culture, through education, training, and just nurturing talent. But I think actually the hardest thing is recruiting as well. So recruiting people and candidates that you may not be able to meet face to face, I think is a super interesting dynamic as well. And I think is it making us ask different questions of candidates as well? Are we still looking for the same attributes in people as before? Is there a change in what we're expecting and asking candidates? So do they need the same background? Do they need to come from what we would say traditionally, background in digital or media or marketing or advertising? Does it mean that we can be a little bit more open to other industries coming into ours as well? And also things like, are you self-motivated? Do you like working independently? These wouldn't normally be very, very standard questions. It would probably be more opposite, wouldn't it? Given how open we are as an industry around engagement and networking, et cetera, et cetera. Do you have good Wi-Fi? Is that a valid question now? So I think some of this is probably just raising a bit more of a spotlight on the way we bring people in as well.
Thanks, everyone. Definitely agree. So now just shifting over and looking at opportunities, what are the driving factors increasing programmatic spend this year? And why did we perform better in 2020 than anticipated? Andreas, did you want to start? Yeah, great.
I think we said some of it already, but we've seen a real increase in the appetite for innovation. This kind of area around portfolio approaches or widening my execution strategies, maybe not using same tactics that I used previously, pre-pandemic or pre-cookieless ecosystem. We've really seen a call out from our customers to keep pushing the boundaries specifically and to try and find new areas of finding audiences, finding moments, and finding connections. And I think there's a real curiosity, which I think is really healthy. And that could be across, the use of universal IDs or audience cohorts, contextual signaling. These are all new types of execution and strategy that we're all trying to evolve and embed into our ecosystem as well. And that's similarly on the media side as well, whether that be through the rise of CTV, gaming as well. There's a huge spotlight on gaming at the moment as well too. So I think there's certainly, for me, a lot of growth could be coming from this general kind of influx of curiosity and testing, which I think is really, really healthy for us all.
So I think from my perspective, I think one of the biggest benefits of programmatic, which Daniel did talk about, is the flexibility that it provides. So I think it is flexible, and it does allow advertisers to turn up spend and to dial their spends down. But I think further than that, the flexibility that programmatic offers is you can use programmatic creative so that you can adapt and tailor your creative messaging quickly. And I think that, as well as many other factors, has been really important over the last year, because the rapidly changing scenarios that we're dealing with kind of in different markets, it's meant that that's been really important to make sure that that message remains relevant, and that people seeing the creatives, it actually resonates with them, as opposed to it being, okay, well, that was relevant 2 months ago or last month, but this month we need something different, because it has been so quick. And I think coupled with ever expanding kind of the channels and formats and different strategies that can be deployed in programmatic now, means that it's more appealing than ever for clients to tap into.
Yeah, I mean, I would just follow on from and agree with everything that Nick has just said. I mean, I'm loath to call it the year of programmatic last year, but I think I just did. But you know, this rise of automation as the preferred way to buy and sell digital advertising formats safely, transparently, effectively, efficiently, they just continue to accelerate over this period, as we saw in all the figures that Daniel showed. And we're seeing it in people's earnings results throughout the industry. And I think there's probably 3 key areas that you distill it into. There's a lot of work over lots of years, and Daniel referenced it a bit of it. We talked about ads.txt, sellers.json. There's been a number of initiatives that have been designed specifically to instill greater trust and transparency in the marketplace. Secondly, you know, we've touched upon talent development, but there's been a big investment now in people and skills and product. And we've grown knowledge and capabilities. I think overall raised the bar for what standards are for in terms of expectations and execution. So lots of stuff to make it safer, real investment in people and skills and resource and knowledge and expertise. And finally, as Nicola referenced, you know, that you can align that now with scaled premium supply across all channels, all formats and all geographies. So yeah, I think there are lots of reasons why programmatic just continues, or the use of automation just continues to drive growth, and those are just a few of them.
Thanks, everyone. So what have you guys been most excited about? What channels or formats do we think will continue to increase the programmatic investment?
Well, I think we said it multiple times here. It's definitely CTV. Also for Rakuten TV, it was a great year in terms of usage, but also of the programmatic buying. But we also that's definitely a new trend. But we also should not forget about a very old trend, mobile. So also 2020 and 21 was the year of this device, mobile. So every year is a mobile year. But in the lockdown, I think that this device and services on this device has even a more and bigger importance for the users, for the people who chatted with not only playing games but also chatted with their loved ones, and also therefore for the advertisers. So I think using this channel on ad-supported messages like Facebook Messenger or Rakuten Viber is also something that we will see in 2021 and going forward. It's an as important device, so to speak, and channel, programmatic channel, as the smart TV device. So I think these are the two, let's say, in-app channels that I'm really excited about.
I have to be slightly biased, but I think it's valid to talk a little bit about why we're excited about the re-rise maybe of contextual. I think we saw it in Daniel's piece, and we're seeing a lot in the press at the moment. We're obviously coming straight from it from Oracle as well, but we are actually really, really excited about the new use cases. And I think I heard a really, I just like the term. It's not your mother's context, which I thought was really interesting. Or I've been using not context from the 80s, but I think we really are starting to see a maturity in that particular vertical. And I think there is certainly a piece around the fact that not one channel will solve the new solution for the new ecosystem, but we do truly believe that there's going to be a really important part for contextual to play in that, and that's really about allowing advertisers and agencies to bring their own metrics and data into that to really augment the use cases as well. And first party is super aligned with that. So it's a kind of a mixed answer around kind of first party and what we can do around kind of augmenting and contextual as well. I think the rise of new players, the rise of some really interesting companies coming into the space is super exciting as well. I think it's exciting to see the confidence in investment. I think we've seen some really high profile movers and shakers at the moment in M&A. So congratulations to Steve as an example. There's been quite a bit in the press at the moment that we've seen some really kind of good confidence coming back in to our programmatic ecosystem from an investment point of view. And I think that's also super healthy. So yeah, they're probably my areas.
So for me, I think everyone probably recognises video, but one channel that I don't think has been mentioned so far is audio. So I think digital audio, it is a great medium for that one-to-one interaction. There's more and more audiences available and more devices. And I think the main reason that we've seen the surge in popularity, people at home during lockdown, they're obviously listening to more content. But also I think unlike some of the mediums, the content production continued, it wasn't affected, and it's thrived regardless of the lockdown restrictions. So I think audio is one to watch for me too.
Yeah, no, I'll just add to that. I'd agree. I mean, I'm pretty excited about all formats. We're an omni-channel SSP, so we're seeing growth in a range of formats and channels. And as Nicola said, CTV we've called out, but areas like display are benefiting from better creative and programmatic. Areas like audio, which has been mentioned, that kind of unique one-to-one immersive experience made kind of ever smarter by data. That's really compelling, really interesting, and seeing great growth there. And someone's put a Q&A, we might not have a chance to get to it in this live session around digital out of home. I would just say, they have certainly not been sleeping in the last year. So I'm just, I'm basically optimistic and excited for the role of all channels, all formats, and the role that programmatic will play in that.
Thanks, guys. So we do only have a few minutes left. And as we are almost midway through 2021, what do we expect the industry to be focusing on, and what are the top priorities for your business?
Okay, I'll kick off. I'll be really quick. I think growing the CTV meaningfully in EMEA and helping partners navigate the shift to post third-party cookie world. So connected TV opportunity in EMEA is right now, and it's very real. We're really focused on that and staying committed to a true omni-channel execution at scale programmatically. But connected TV presents a unique opportunity now. And on the identity front, we think there's a lot of clarity to be found in all the noise. A lot of collaboration is needed, but a mixed identity regime with logged in users, publisher-driven audience segments, and browser-based auctions, we think are really exciting. We're doing lots of great working groups, looking at various ways in which we can drive some of those forward. So if you're interested, anyone, bad plug, but come speak to us.
Yeah, so I think what Andreas said, that the contextual targeting will be important, and to do this, we will focus, on content. If you have to have the right content on all different platforms to create the right context. But at the same time, of course, we will work on an identity solution, having this also available to clients, and I think there will be a nice mixture of both signals coming our way. And in the meanwhile, it's all about educating the CTV buyer and the TV buyer about this new CTV space.
So for me, I think this year is Xaxis's 10-year anniversary. So it's a big milestone for us, and we'll be celebrating that throughout 2020. Some of the things that we're going to be doing is creating thought starters on 10 key trends that we think all marketers should be thinking about. So topics like AI and what role that plays in the industry, rise of gaming and how that becomes an opportunity, e-commerce, how that has the biggest impact, and I think to the question in the chat box, how we make the most of the boom in digital out of home. I think if I was going to focus on kind of two of those, I would say AI. It is integrated into every industry, but the application of data and talent to the algorithmic models that we're using will set some of us apart. And I think how we connect that with good creative execution and make the most of the different signals that we can pass into the algorithms and link that to great creative.
So I'll just try and round that off. I think a lot of what everyone said can also point towards what we're seeing towards a convergence of tech and martech. I think that's happening quicker than maybe we expected. So there's certainly an acceleration that's probably pushed by legislation and privacy. So supporting brands and agencies to make the most of known audiences from marketing assets, and then through the use of AI, machine learning, and other areas of operational integration, bring that into the programmatic world so it can be more tactically used to execute for targeting and measurement, I think is certainly more of a high level priority for us. I think more of a day-to-day or a second piece on that for a short-term point of view is really, again, educating and supporting agencies and brands to navigate the new ecosystem through brand suitability, planning insights, which I think is really, really important, media quality, and generally robust targeting solutions in a cookieless ecosystem.
Great. Thank you all so much for your time. Really appreciate it. I'm going to hand this back over to David.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Lisa, and thank you all for an incredible panel discussion and for sharing your insight into the European programmatic advertising landscape. It's greatly appreciated. Just before we move on, we'd like to get your thoughts on what you think are the biggest areas of growth for programmatic investment in a quick poll, which could come up on your screen now. There you go. Fantastic. Whilst you complete the poll, just going back to the panel discussion, I think it's certainly been a memorable year with several barriers for us to overcome, including the pandemic, preparing for a post-third-party cookie era. But the resilience shown by the industry, coupled with the future growth projections, makes for a very exciting year ahead. And if you're enjoying the poll right now and feel that you'd like to share more thoughts on the state of our programmatic industry, please look out for IAB Europe's Attitudes to Programmatic survey. This will be released for response next month, and hope that all stakeholders from advertisers to publishers and everyone in between will complete. The results from the survey that is now in its 7th year will be released in September, and it truly is a finger on the pulse of the European digital market. And each year the survey really does flesh out the key concerns and opportunities that impact all of digital marketing. So look out for that survey. And the results should be in. There you go. Fantastic. Well, what channels do you think will drive the future growth of programmatic investment? It appears to be a clear winner there, CTV, and we are all excited about CTV, but there are some really notable items or areas of exciting kind of opportunity around audio, digital out of home, and mobile in-app as well, obviously. Well, thank you all for completing that. And as we look into the future, it's a perfect time to discuss everyone's favorite topic, cookies. So let's move on to our next session, the evolution of programmatic advertising in a post-third-party cookie era. Now, I'm pleased to introduce the moderator for this session, Alwyn, Programmatic Advertising and Ad Manager at UIM. So don't forget submit your questions for the panelists using the Q&A box located at the bottom of your Zoom window, but I'd love to hand over to Alwyn now. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Yeah, I'm very delighted to moderate the next panel, which will be the evolution of programmatic advertising in a post-third-party cookie world. And I'm having with me a great panel, which is Tanya Field, CPO and co-founder of Nomatic. We have Rachel Guns, General Manager Activation of Comscore. We have Chris Keenan, Regional Vice President, Business Development of MediaMath, and Augustin Ducrea, MD Southern Europe in Next Exchange. Thank you guys being with me. I think we are all there. I'm just seeing, I think we are missing Augustin. I'm not sure if Augustin might join. I'm not on my screen. Anyways, guys, thanks for joining this panel, and I would ask you guys to quickly introduce you before we deep dive into the topic. Maybe Tanya, we start with you. Could you give a short introduction, please?
Good morning, everybody. Well, in fact, nearly good afternoon, I think. My name's Tanya Field, and I am one of the co-founders and Chief Product Officer of Novatic. We are a company that specializes in working with the telecommunications industry to deliver an alternative mechanism for establishing verified identity in a post-cookieless world.
Thanks a lot so much. Rachel, thanks for joining. You're coming from Boston. I hope it's not a horrible time. It is actually, but I hope you will be fine with us. We have interesting topics, so we keep you awake. So thanks. Please introduce yourself.
Well, I'm glad to be here, and I've had sufficient coffee to get us going this morning. I'm Rachel Gans. I'm the General Manager of Activation Solutions for Comscore. That means I oversee our audience and contextual targeting solutions. So this topic could not be more pressing and more important, and excited to be here to talk about it.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Chris.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Chris Keenan. I lead business development in EMEA for MediaMath, based here in London. For those of you who aren't familiar with MediaMath, we're a global DSP. And when it comes to identity, we've taken a portfolio approach. I'm working with really the leading identity and contextual partners around the world in order to provide our brand and agency partners with optionality in the post-third-party cookie ecosystem. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to the discussion.
Thanks, Chris. And over to you, Augustin.
Thank you, Alvin. So I'm Augustin Ducrea. I'm the Regional Managing Director, Southern Europe for Index Exchange. And I also lead the French IAB France cookieless post third-party cookie world task force. And I'm very glad and happy to be with you today.
Thank you so much, Augustin. Okay, let's deep dive into the topic. I think before we start into the discussion, I think it's worth mentioning what is the, let's say, what's the framework for what we discuss. And I think there's three major factors. It's the end consumer. I think he has changed a lot. He wants transparency. He wants to understand how his data is being used. We have the legislation for sure. So a big impact through GDPR, through e-privacy guideline, etc. And last but not least, we have the browser gatekeepers, which we will definitely discuss in more detail in the upcoming panel. Maybe if we, before we start with the gatekeeping, discuss the legal environment. There's two big factors or big laws which are influencing all of us, and I think it's worth mentioning. It's the GDPR for sure, which deals with all the personal data. What is the legal basis of using personal data, and to whom do we transfer personal data? And on the other hand side, there's the e-privacy guideline, which focuses basically on the device of the on the access of the device. This has led in the last years to court rulings such as Fashion ID, Facebook, everybody I guess is aware of, and another court ruling which was Planet 49. And last but not least, we have the DPAs in all the different European countries. Framing what we do and what we are not allowed to do. So that's I think a very important factor, even if it's not necessarily required to take out third-party cookies to fulfill the laws. I think it was definitely one of the major factors influencing how the gatekeepers moved. But let's deep dive into browser gatekeeping. Augustin, maybe first to you. Can you describe us a bit what happened in the last 2 to 3 years? Safari, Firefox, Edge blocked the cookies, third-party cookies already, and Chrome, well, I guess everybody's aware of that, said that they will starting of next week. What is your perspective on that?
Yeah, as an introduction, and I will also add to what you have said, that first of all, cookie is not illegal. It's totally legal. As soon as you collect the consent, so it's not for any legal reason that the cookie will disappear. Yes, so the main thing that happened is what we call smart cookie blocking technology, led by, as you said, by Apple with ITP, and then by Firefox with ETP. So we know that the third-party cookie are blocked since like almost 2.5 years now. And the main change is that Google Chrome has announced that they will the third-party cookie will be obsolete by 2022, and it's a big change compared to the others. They gave us like 2 years in order to be ready for this move, and it's not a move. It's all the industry is based on third-party cookies since like 25 years. So it's like it's a very significant move. The good thing is that now we have 2 years to be ready, and we have seen that all the market, all the ecosystem is working on some alternatives. So it's there are many, and I've seen it in previous panel they were talking about this, but there are mainly around authentication. Sorry, it's very hard for me in French. Authentication-based solutions, first-party strategy, and of course Google Privacy Sandbox. But we should name that Privacy Sandbox without Google. The very good thing about those solutions is that they really put the user on the first place, and what we can see on all those initiatives is that they will be for sure privacy centric. They will be consumer focused. And the last, probably more effective than the what we knew with the cookie.
Thank you, Augustin. Before we deep dive into the solutions like Sandbox, etc., first-party data, as you mentioned, let's quickly stay a bit on the web app ecosystem. If we talk about third-party cookies going away, it's all about web. But I think, as we have also seen in the former panel discussions, etc., web is not everything. In the meantime, we are way into the smartphone mobile world, and more than half of the traffic of the internet is not web, it's app. So maybe Tanya, Chris, what is your perspective of that in a world where more than 50% of the traffic is app traffic? Chrome Sandbox is not the only solution. We see it with Apple moving forward, and Android might follow in a different way. How do you see that, and how we tackle the upcoming, let's say, mobile operating system problems coming up?
So I basically think that the movement at the moment is towards putting the consumer at the center, as you mentioned earlier, and that this doesn't stop with the changes to the third-party cookie environment. It expands across all other mechanisms for identifying users. And obviously, the most complete one are the MAIDs that exist in the environment for the app world. We've already seen the moves from Apple with their latest upgrade. I think it's the 14.5 rollout that makes the differences for the total transparency, and means that third-party use cannot be sanctioned without the direct consent of the user. As you mentioned, we believe that similar moves will be undertaken by Google, because if they actually hold true to their privacy at the center, then they're going to have to make attendant changes in the app world that mirror the changes that they've made in the web environment. But I don't think it even stops there. I think there are many other methodologies used for fingerprinting that are being diminished almost daily, and that won't stop either. So I think what we're looking at is a fundamental change to the fabric of how we have established identity in the past, not just third-party cookie, which is the predominant one, but also many of the other alternatives. And so what we really need to be considering is turning it on its head, putting the consumer at the center, and basically making sure we establish an identity framework, which I don't believe will just encompass a single solution. I think there'll be a level of interoperability and there'll be a number of solutions that work together, but that establish a new framework where we are really taking into account that it's driven by the customer that controls the process.
The only point I'd add is, as Tanya mentioned, with 14.5 rolling out, I think less than 2 weeks ago, you've already seen reports come in with the opt-in percentage of the users. Flurry's report said that it was only 11% of iOS users worldwide that have opted in to app tracking. And if, and likely when, Google applies similar restrictions or privacy enhancements, we'll see similar figures for the Android world as well.
Maybe one more question, Augustin, Chris. I mean, you are representing like the both opposite sides of the programmatic ecosystem with SSP and DSP. In a world where Apple, let's say, decides for themselves what compliance is, independent of, let's say, European laws or other laws in the US, how are you guys moving forward? Because IAB Europe, for example, invented the TCF, and it has really adopted widely out there, standardizing exactly what you guys said. The user needs to be first, he needs to be asked, he needs to be explained transparently what we guys do in the ecosystem. But what if Apple doesn't agree and just wants to kick the advertising system out of their closed shop?
I don't know if you want to start, Augustin, or I can take a first stab. Well, Apple is only one device maker. They don't represent the majority of smartphone traffic worldwide. So that's just one kind of piece there. I do believe there's an opportunity for advertisers who can smartly target and manage frequency across Apple devices, though, as CPMs for those opted out users of device tracking are actually, I think I saw 43% lower than those who have opted in. And so if you are able to think about who the typical consumer is that buys an iPhone or uses the Safari browser, you can use some kind of demographic. You're already working with a core demographic to start with there. Augustin, anything from you?
No, I have nothing to add. You already, I had exactly the same answer than you, so nothing to add.
Okay, then have a bit of a look at the solution out there you guys already mentioned. There will be, let's say, 3 clusters. There will be the world of login IDs or persistent IDs, as you want to call it. Then there will be this, Google invented a nice word with a sandbox. There will be core targeting, which is quite old actually, and we will discuss that in a minute, because I think, Chris, you guys are using it every day since you guys exist. And last but not least, and I will be really interested in, Rachel, also in your opinion on that, because you guys have developed a solution. There will be semantic, which is 20 years old. So in programmatic world, in a post-cookie world, we're not looking to new solutions, but maybe with a different view on solutions we have used in the past, and for good or bad reasons, maybe put aside. So let's have a look at that. Rachel, Tanya, login IDs, I guess you guys have a bit of a different view if that is a good or a bad thing, and how could they be adopted in the market?
Shall I go first, Rachel, or do you
Sure, go ahead.
Sorry, it's a bit difficult when you're on a video call to establish who's going to. Yeah, so I mean, I think, as I said earlier, that there's going to be a mix of different solutions to overcome the demise of the third-party cookie and other things. And I think authenticated IDs form part of the solution, right? By definition, they are not going to be the total solution, because ultimately not everyone, for every visit they make to every website or every app, is going to be prepared to log in, right? And there are many users that want to just consume content without exchanging that level of information. I think the accepted norm, and I've heard varying numbers, is between 20 to 30% of users overall will probably authenticate one way or another with different websites. But ultimately what that may mean is you'll effectively, if that's the only solution, end up with what I call the survival of the fittest. So those that offer the most value to elicit the authenticated process will be the ones that actually benefit from the larger numbers of people that they're then able to identify. So ultimately, authentication is great. It gives a very deep view for the consumer to the environments that the users are prepared to authenticate in. But on top of that, there is the requirement to understand much more about the rest of the users, the anonymized or ghost users in the web. And the fact that they are anonymized or ghost users doesn't take away from the fact that we still want to be able to manage audience delivery so that we can optimize the advertising. So for me, there is a requirement for complementary solutions to the authenticated logged in environments, such that you can still offer consumers transparency, but you can have a verification process which doesn't involve any exchange of personal information. You're just able to identify who those users are. And obviously, for me, that is and can be driven by the telecommunications companies, because they are, first of all, trusted providers, and they are used to delivering identity solutions for high-level services such as banking and things like that. The consumers trust them to do that. And in this instance, because they sit at the center of every digital interaction that occurs, they are able to leverage that benefit to deliver a verification solution without any exchange of personal identity, obviously still with the consent of the users. So for me, it's a mix of authentication, extended solutions that cover the ghost and anonymized users, and then privacy sandbox as walled garden approaches, and then obviously utilizing contextual. And I think it will be a mixture of all of those elements that help us navigate through the choppy waters of the post-cookie world.
Yeah, I completely agree with Tanya. And I think the word that she said earlier about interoperability is going to be really key from a ComScore perspective, both on the targeting and the measurement side. That's what it's all about, because as we are partnering with all of the different solutions out there, Privacy Sandbox, Unified ID 2.0, kind of you name it, we're partnering with it. I think that's going to have to be key, in addition to creating solutions like the contextual one you referenced earlier. And I think as we explore, with every week, different announcements come out from a user tracking, specifically from a targeting standpoint, from a user tracking identifier based solution. There are frankly a lot of questions about scale, about GDPR viability, and those are going to continue to be ongoing conversations. So for advertisers and for brands who, regardless of this conversation, still have KPIs that they are tasked with meeting, it's going to need to be creative and flexible and testing a number of different solutions in order to make sure they're still able to achieve that, regardless of the environment and the changes that are going on around them.
Yeah, Rachel, with scale, I think you mentioned a very important point for the login industry or identity vendor landscape. How do you see the adoption at the moment in the market? Is that something which comes somewhere in the future, or are we on a good path? What is your perspective on that?
Yeah, scale is a funny one, because I think, the numbers that Tanya and Chris were just quoting demonstrate the different challenges scale will have based on different cookieless solutions. And that's why working with partners who are adopting and looking to work across them is going to be key, because anyone with any new announcement, like we had the announcement that came out, I guess, a month ago or so now, about hashed emails from Google, that could have potential changes to some of the scale associated with hashed email-based identifier solutions. So I think scale is probably, from my standpoint, besides the kind of foundational GDPR compliance nature of the solution, once you get above the GDPR question, then scale, I think, is actually the biggest one, is can you still run a campaign that's going to achieve the scale and reach you're looking for, period. And that we'll need to make sure that we have the solutions underneath to enable advertisers to do that.
Thank you so much. Chris, maybe a question in your direction. Something which is super tied to scale and adoption is the question, is there some kind of regional concepts or let's say corporation identity hubs? I think you guys at MediaMass are really thinking every day about that, with whom to cooperate, what to use for bidding in the different regions in the world to make that work. So how does that look like?
Right. So in short, no, there really won't be a one size fits all type solution. And a regional or even market by market solution will be required, especially for global brands who have presence in LATAM and EMEA, in APAC, North America. You'll need to be thinking through which partners and solutions work best, especially given localized regulations as well. So when we work with our brands and kind of agency partners to develop an identity roadmap, we help them identify the right partners or really solutions on the market by market basis. You may have read the IAB guide to the post third-party cookie world. We included some of the kind of standard RFI type questions that we work through with our partners to understand that. We kind of break it down in 3 different areas. The first being scale, second being privacy, and the third being the capabilities. So for scale, we look at things like what's the availability and scale of the identifier in the bid stream by country? What is their current and future roadmap for SSP integrations? What kind of data assets are powering the ID graph that they have? So for example, with Prebid's Unified ID 2.0, the focus has been on large publishing partners like Washington Post, whereas an ID vendor like Novatique or Zeotap have had telco partners as primary drivers of their ID graphs. For privacy, we want to understand what is the identifier based on? Is it a hashed email or another form of PII? Or is it an identifier based on device characteristics? What are the consent frameworks that are compatible? How is a user able to opt out? And then from a capability standpoint, it's really about what DMPs and other ecosystem partners are they integrated with? Which kind of data assets are powering the graph? And if they have different ID partners, how do they provide addressability and really the cookie restricted browsers, which you talked about earlier with iOS? And how would that identifier work with IDFA tracking? Will the identifier be in emerging channels like CTV and audio? These are all things that really you need to understand at a partner by partner, market by market level. And there are many different ways for ID partners to differentiate themselves. And this differentiation, particularly when it comes to scale in the markets, will mean brands need to identify multiple partners, not just one and just be done with it. You can't just choose LiveRamp because they've been global, but they don't have any scale in continental Europe, or not much, I'll say. They're growing, but they're not there. You have European Net ID Foundation, you have Zeotap, you have Novatique, like you have other partners. So you can't just choose one. And just like third-party audience providers and SSPs over the past decade have faced a similar challenge with growing scale and adoption, identity providers will need to do the exact same thing as well.
Okay, so quite interesting. Thanks for the feedback. I think what you also transport basically in your answer is that there's quite some complexity and that the ecosystem, being a DSPs, SSPs, need basically to support the advertiser landscape in this selection process. So I think us in the media industry, there's quite a role we have to take over to make it clear to the market. Okay, let's move a bit forward from login solutions to what I would call as a pillar, core targeting. The Chrome Privacy Sandbox is basically a cohort solution. It creates a identifier at the browser level. That's new. Augustin, maybe you can give us a bit of an overview what Privacy Sandbox is in total. If you look at the market or listen to the press, I mean, it's crazy. There's lots of bird calls in terms of Fletch, Turtle Dove, Flock. What is all of this, and how do you guys approach that?
Yeah, I think it's a good summary. It's crazy, you know, but I will try to give you a quick overview of the situation. First of all, as you said, the project has been initiated by Google Chrome, but now it's open source. So it's now hosted by the W3C, which is very important in the development of the project. And Privacy Sandbox is not only a solution. You are talking about cohort, but it's a collection of solution propositions and proposals and through APIs. And last, as you said, so all those APIs will exist at the browser level, and it's a huge move. So why Sandbox? So I don't know if you're aware, but in the software development, a sandbox is a testing environment, and it's exactly what we are doing today. You know, Chrome gave us like 2 years in order to be ready, and but also to interact and to be part of the project with them. So feel free. Everyone is allowed to participate, and I think it's the key asset of this project is that we can interact with the project. There is the GitHub, and you can post your proposal, you can post an issue, and Google will answer to the project. So it's the very first part is that. And a sandbox is also a limited area where you can play in, and it's also the second part of the project, and it's exactly what they want. It's a balance in between, as you said, the privacy and the user, and and supporting also the ad tech ecosystems. But to make it short, there are 3 main proposals around the sandbox. It's not only advertising. The first one is around like protecting the user and against the fraud. And there are 2 main solutions there. There is one called privacy budget. So privacy budget, it's you will have a kind of credit of information that you can retain, and as soon as you reach this limit, they will block the information. The aim of this and the purpose of this proposition and this solution is to combat what they call the fingerprinting, and also to limit the creation of persistent identifier outside of the browser. The second one is what they call Trust Token API, and Trust Token API will probably, replace the third-party cookie. So it will, today we track the user through a third-party cookie. Tomorrow in Sandbox, we will track the user via Trust Token API. It's an encrypted token, and we shouldn't be able to link the user or also to forge the token. I am clear? And the second family is around the measurement. So they have 2 main propositions. The first one is what they call conversion measurement. So they will measure the conversion through the ad clicks, and then they will push those information to the third-party partners in order to measure, or also to do the reporting of the campaign. The second one is aggregate reporting API. So aggregate reporting API will measure and will tell on which website the user went and which campaigns the user have been exposed to, and then they will push this information to the third party, to the partners, and they will be able to do, like, for instance, frequency capping, etc. And the last,
maybe jumping in at that point, can that be compared then, like if we look at the web world, it's ad conversion measurements through that mechanism. If we look at the Apple world at the current moment, that's called SK ad network. Is that a good comparison? So will be there similar mechanisms to measure what I'm doing in terms of campaigns?
I cannot answer. I don't know the Apple world enough to tell you. Maybe there is someone that knows that, but I don't know.
No, fine. We can leave it for later. Maybe Chris, okay. An idea here on that point. Okay, then we move forward. Then there was the last part, ad targeting.
Yes, and the last one is it's the activation, and you already talk about this. Flock for sure. So it's the main solution for audience targeting. The main difference is that before, with the third-party cookie, so we use the third-party cookie in order to track the interest of the user within the navigation, and then we display personalized ads. Sorry, and the main difference with Flock is that the browser will use machine learning to categorize the user within groups of thousands of users. It's a minimum of 5,000, if I am not wrong. Wrong yet, right, tell me, but it's 5,000, and you will be only in one group at a time. So it means that, for instance, I'm a male in between 40 to 50, a fan of automotive. I won't be in automotive group, I won't be in male group in the very same time. So I will be probably in a group of male in between 40 to 50 interest by automotive. But this will evolve during the time and through my navigation. And the last one is fledge. You were talking about birds, etc. So the first part of, the first proposal was turtle dove, and it's pretty much what they call, and it's the retargeting solution based on the interest that the advertisers put in it, and it's where we had the biggest interaction from the market. So you have said that Criteo has pushed a proposal called Sparrow. Then you have Google Ads also had a proposal called Dovekey, Magnite, etc. And finally, the turtle evolved to Fledge. And the main difference is that they wanted to have an independent gatekeeper. They did not want the gatekeeper to be on the browser level, but to have an independent and a third-party gatekeeper. So it's the biggest move on this part. Last part that I wanted to highlight is that we are also able to test those solutions. So since the beginning of the year, we can test a trust token API. Unfortunately, we cannot test Flock in Europe because for privacy reasons. So if you are outside of Europe, please, you can. You should have started the test in a month, and we expect also to do the test on Fledge, like starting Q3 and also Q3 in Europe on Flock.
Yeah, thank you so much, Augustin. I think it's a super technical topic. If you try to read through Google or W3C documents, you're stopping after page 3 and starting at page 1 again. So quite a technical topic. And thanks for mentioning. I think it's starting now in the US, not in Europe now. We'll see when it comes to Europe. But I think it's good starting to understand the mechanisms and how to deal with it. Maybe another topic, Chris, in your direction, because what the overall logic Flock is doing, it's cohort targeting and the browser, but it's something we use since ages. And we basically, on the publisher side, etc., have it for ages. And in programmatic world, it was very simple. It was pre-targeting deals. Is that now the rise or the re-rise of pre-targeting deals in the future?
Yeah, I'll kind of take a cue from Nicola, who mentioned the previous panel. One of the biggest benefits of programmatic, especially when activated against the open web, has been the flexibility and nimbleness it provides to brands to either scale up or scale back campaigns as needed. But that said, we have seen an uptick in clients negotiating direct deals with publishers to ensure that scaled access to the audiences on properties that they know perform well. And some clients have always been very heavy users of PMP or PG deals with publishers that had long-standing relationships with. But there are also other clients who have primarily run their activity on the open web, and they're now just beginning to dive into their site transparency reports, looking at the domains, the different categories or kind of subfolders within that domain to see which performs well. And so they're then able to strike up those deals now in advance of the coming changes. But those publishers or clients who have already started working with publishers, they're starting to look more into ways of how they can leverage their first-party data in a better way with those publishers through partners like Permuted, for example. They're able to kind of create audiences and push those directly into the SSPs and match that there. So that's definitely a trend that we've seen an uptick in for sure.
Yeah, thank you so much. Since we're in general running a bit light on schedule, maybe Rachel, last question to the third part, contextual. So what can we expect there, which is better what we have seen like the last 20 years looking forward?
Yeah, absolutely. And it was a phrase they used on the last panel that I thought was a good one was, it's not your mother's contextual targeting. Where I think when most people think of contextual targeting based solutions, they think of the core of brand safety, they think of contextual relevance, the IAB categorization, and that is all still in place, still important, and still a valuable tactic that advertisers and brands can be using. I think what's interesting and some of the evolution of this, though, is when you start to marry the audience concepts and audience attributes, things like age and gender, media consumption, just different attributes which historically have been used from a programmatic ecosystem from an audience standpoint. Comscore's created a solution called predictive audiences, where we're applying that to contextual signals, which therefore makes it GDPR friendly, and being able to use that as a mechanism that is not a user tracking identifier for the purposes of targeting. It's truly based on the content signals, and then apply those to things like obviously display, which is sort of where contextual really started. But then you get into the conversations we're having, you can apply it to mobile, video, CTV devices directly. And I think this interesting innovation, Comscore, we're doing this in partners with our DSP partners like MediaMath, but getting that on the shelf today so folks can do that, especially with the ability to apply that to CTV devices and CTV content, I think is really showing you take what was old and what served its purpose and still does, but you really start to enhance it with a lot of the interesting AI, machine learning, and data science behind it to enable the privacy-friendly attributes, but really apply it in such a way that can get at the concepts of audience targeting in ways that we've never done before. So I think it's pretty exciting stuff.
Yeah, thank you so much. So we in a very short time really tried to tackle this whole new ecosystem coming up there with the different angles, being it login IDs, being it cohort targeting, being it the new contextual 2.0. Maybe a short round through all of you. What are the key actions publishers, advertisers for sure, have to take in the next 6 to 12 months to move forward or to move into this new world of targeting when third-party cookies go away and mobile ad IDs are also not there anymore? Maybe Tanya, maybe you start.
Yeah, I mean, I think this was touched upon in the previous panel, but I think we're in a period of what I would call test and learn, right? So basically, there is no absolute solution. There is a requirement for interoperability, as we mentioned earlier on, and it is incumbent, therefore, upon everybody to look at what's most appropriate for them. I think probably Chris touched on it earlier in terms of looking at the different evaluation strategies that can be utilized, but it's incumbent to test and learn. And we all need to be nimble in assisting with that process so that each independent can establish what's best for them. But they need to do that within the confines of knowing that ultimately for each and every person to make it work for them, it needs to work for the other side of the coin as well. So for a publisher utilizing first-party data to deliver into the ecosystem, the advertiser needs to know that by utilizing that first-party data, they're going to get the attendance scale that they want with it. And that sort of means that it's not only about test and learn, but it's about quite a lot of standardization. I firmly believe that first-party data is something that is going to be reaping the rewards it should have had previously, that it didn't have because of the third-party ecosystem that existed. But in order for it to be able to deliver the scale, we need to have some sort of level of standardization so that without any data mixing with clean rooms or not, we're able to still deliver first-party data on a cross-domain level against a standardized taxonomy, for the want of a better word.
Thanks so much. Rachel, a very short answer from you.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's all about test and learn. So my advice would be find partners who are doing innovative things and start testing it now, because we have enough runway now that you can start to get that in place so that you don't skip a beat once third-party cookies actually do vanish, and get those practices underway today to the best of your ability would be my best advice.
Thanks so much. Augusto.
Yes, the same, but I will add something. You know, you should have started yesterday. So start tomorrow morning. It's coming. It's now. So it's not it's the reality. And the second thing, we in the password, you know, we totally forgot one thing is trust and the relationship that we have with the user. And we are now here. And so we should in every solution that we test, we should put the user in the first row, and how we can add and bring something to the user and more value to the user.
Thanks.
Just very quickly from my side, everything everyone else has already said, especially to Augustin's point, you should have started yesterday. Instead of thinking about 6 to 12 months from now, start thinking about 3 to 4 months from now, because Q4 is right around the corner. You don't want to be doing a broad sweeping test and learn strategy in Q4. Everyone knows that. You have code freezes on sites. It's just not the right time. And then after Q4 is 2022, and the cookie is supposed to be going away. So start now.
Okay, perfect. So future is now, start now. That's the overall sum. Thank you so much, guys, for your time, for your input. Back to David.
Yes, thank you, Alvin, and to all the panelists. Another great discussion with rich takeaways. And yes, I love that start yesterday on this topic. It was a good takeaway. But before we move on, we'd love to get your thoughts on how prepared your company feels you are for the post third-party cookie era with another quick poll. So that should be on the screen. So whilst you complete the poll, I just want to go back to the panel discussion. I think it's very clear that as we approach this new post third-party cookie era, we have to keep talking and working together as an industry. It will all be about testing, learning, and adopting. And at IAB Europe, it's a core focus of our work plan. And we have recently released an update to the post third-party cookie era guide that was originally created in June 2020. The re-release was on February 2021. Within the update, we share status of the latest industry and corporate solutions and an up-to-date outlook from where the industry is at today. And I'm sure we'll be posting that in the chat box, if not already. We also have a dedicated post third-party cookie task force that meets bi-weekly. So if you'd like to join, please do get in touch. And the results should be in. Let's see. So on the answer, on a scale 1 to 5, 1 being not at all, 5 being extremely, how prepared is your company for a post third-party cookie era? Really pleasing to see that there are significant portions around 3 and 4, and really positive outlook at 5 as well. But look, the world is going to be quite fluid, and please stay on top of all these kind of changing opportunities. But yes, please download the guide for more information. Now let's look to the next panel and moving on, which explores programmatic trading, basically programmatic trading from an advertiser's perspective and what it means to advertisers today. To lead this panel discussion, I'd like to welcome my colleague, Tanisha, who's Senior Business Director for EMEA at DoubleVerify. And again, please do submit your questions for the panelists in the Q&A box. Over to you, Tanisha.
Thanks, David. So as more and more advertisers starting to look to adopt a hybrid approach to programmatic buying, this panel will explore the in-house model. We'll look at whether taking programmatic in-house is still popular among advertisers, and also what programmatic trading means to them today in terms of attribution and preparing for a post-third cookie world. We've got a host of experts from Klarna, Red Hat, Pubmatic, and the Trade Desk. So I'm going to hand over to them now to introduce themselves, starting with Moritz.
Thanks, Anisha. Hi, guys. I'm Moritz from Stockholm. I work as a senior marketing associate at Klarna. We're focusing on global scale around paid performance related to app acquisition in general. Klarna is a leading global payment provider, bank, and shopping service, which operates across 17 different markets with 90 million active consumers at the moment across 3 different continents. Very happy to be here, guys.
Thanks, Maurice. Anna?
Hi, everybody. I'm Anna Luti, Digital Media Manager at Red Hat. For those that are unfamiliar with Red Hat, it is the world-leading provider of enterprise open source solutions. And I've been working in digital media for 16 years, mainly in agencies. Before joining Red Hat, I was working at GroupM for 10 years. And now I manage a team of digital media marketeers in-house dealing with media campaigns in the EMEA region.
Great, thank you, Anna. And Zaid?
Hi, I'm Zaid, Director of Advertiser Solutions EMEA at PubMatic. PubMatic is an SSP, been a mainstay in programmatic, first to market with RTB digital automation technology back in 2006, and now bringing in quite a lot of tools and solutions to the buy side as well. Nice to meet you all.
Thank you, and Omar.
Hi, everybody. My name is Omar Velasquez. I'm a lead associate trading director here in the Madrid office of the Trade Desk. For those who don't know us, the Trade Desk is a demand-side platform, and we allow advertisers to buy media programmatically across all channels globally.
Thank you, guys. So let's start off with how you buy advertising through programmatic channels. Is this done in-house, hybrid, or through an agency? And why have you chosen this approach? Probably more suited to Anna and Moritz.
Yeah, sure. So currently we have a hybrid model. So we bring in-house a few people from the agency world where I come from as well. And this let us bring in-house core competencies, drive the media strategy, focus on the management of our first-party data, our audiences, and let the agency focus on the delivery and on bringing results. I think it's a great partnership, and it lets you have the best of both worlds.
Yeah, and I can agree with Anna there. We are also having a Klarna and hybrid model where we focus on some operational work across different channels, but also around the strategic part. And then we have an agency that is very beneficial in some parts and some areas where the discussion around which approach is best. I think the hybrid is the best one due to the fact that we can actually focus on different kind of things. And I think that one important topic to discuss here as well is the more or less the beneficial part of having competence in-house, but also having an agency outside that I know that Anna and me agree on this one, but that having an agency that focuses on multiple clients will be beneficial in the long term, since they are focusing on a different kind of complex problems that they can adopt across different kind of clients. However, I think that from a client perspective, it's very important to be focused on the core business, and which an agency cannot be 100% part of, which I completely understand. And therefore, I think that is something that I would say is much more beneficial in the long term, and not just having one in-house or the agency side.
What would you say are the pros and cons of in-housing, and what kind of tips do you think brands and agencies would need, and what they need to think about when making this decision? Because it's obviously a big decision.
It is definitely a big decision, and I think that the pros are that you're getting closer to the business and you can adopt more quickly. You can be more aligned on the business goals and any kind of data that some people cannot share outside their competence or outside their business in general. However, I think that the biggest issue is, again, the competence, that it's very expensive to if you are a big player, a big company, a big client. I think that that is something that's going to be very expensive to recruit people and find people as well, especially find the right people with the right competence is extremely hard. If I'm looking at just Sweden or the smaller markets, it is very expensive.
Yeah, and there is for sure also a problem with turnover. If we were having everything in-house, I would be very, very afraid of people leaving to go to other companies or in agencies. Instead, with an hybrid model, the turnover is handled by the agency, who is usually staffed to have redundancy in the people staff and can swap in new people to do the job. But I totally agree. The best thing is to have some people in-house that understand both the business and the media landscape.
Makes sense. And in terms of trends, it's probably more for you, Zaid. What kind of trends are you seeing among the advertisers that you're working with, and what changes have you seen over the past year?
Yeah, well, there's certainly no one-size-fits-all solution, right? But programmatic used to be this black box being tended by the agency for a long time. But now market conditions have changed. Advertisers and brands want a lot more visibility and control over their supply chain and their media buys. And technology has become a lot more accessible. It's been democratized. Brands can hire the right people to deliver the job for them, but as Maritz has pointed out, it can be expensive. You know, you do need to have the right infrastructure, hence the hybrid model. And that's a nice balance, you know, if you want to dip your toes into the water. When in-housing, brands need to think about things like setup, you need to think about data, tools, talent, and it's not easy. And if you are going down the hybrid route, working with the right agency, the job can be done. I think from a brand perspective, it's really about knowing where your strengths are and being able to use the talent that you have access to, both internally as well as with the agency. Again, if you're going hybrid, you know, to work very collaboratively. And this is where we've seen the most success. In addition to that, working for an SSP, we have, you know, our header bidding wrapper solution that advertisers are using. And this has revealed to them that they could be using, you know, sometimes 20 or even up to 30 different partners to access the same inventory. So once they see this, they start really reflecting, start asking questions about their supply partners, who they're working with, and then perhaps, you know, talk about the consolidation process. Something that I talk about a lot to my clients and advertisers is supply path optimization. It is still hot on the agenda. I do feel that it has become a bit of a catchphrase for many of the different ad tech initiatives we see today. But at the core, it's really about, I guess, buyers understanding and optimizing supply, right? There has to be an understanding between what the buyers want to achieve and what the sellers and publishers' goals are. And in digital, you know, brands and publishers, ultimately, we all want the same thing, you know, and that's working towards the same goal. Creating a transparent programmatic setup that really focuses on the consumer's ad experiences at the core, and then all, you know, values inventory at a fair price for everyone.
Great, thank you. Yeah, really good points. In terms of barriers to programmatic trading, sorry, for you over the last year, would you say that you're spending more or less than the previous year? And this is probably more directed again to Anna and Maritz.
We are currently forecasting a flat budget compared to 2020, so more or less the same.
Yeah, we see it similar over here as well. That it's a flat increase or decrease.
So no new barriers?
Barriers, we are all barriers. They're like the total media digital industry have had barriers over the last years, especially during the last couple of months. I think that we see a big changes with iOS 14.5 being launched, for instance, and on the Chrome new settings that is rolling out. I think that that is something that I see as one well, I don't see it as a barrier. I see it as an opportunity, more or less, that you need to be more focused in the long term. I think that something that both Andreas from the first panel and the last panel discussed as well is more or less like contextual targeting. We see a lot of new opportunities rising up thanks to the barriers, I would say. But also when you're looking at kind of different attribution kind of platforms, you need to have different technologies in place. And that is something that I think that a lot of like players on the market in general is facing, is hard in general, since it's a jungle out there on what it is that you can actually get. And something that they also touched upon last panel is like, there's no single fits all. So you need to adopt, and there we come back to the hybrid approach again, that like the knowledge in-house might be very limited, and therefore you might need to have a strong partner with you on the way to mitigate the risks moving forward.
Definitely. And are these similar trends? Oh, sorry.
No, I was agreeing. We have the same barriers in programmatic and the rest of the industry. What I'm noticing is that programmatic provides a more mature context also compared to the walled gardens. In particular, it grants more transparency and control. And you can really try to find the best solution that fits your reality. That is not the case with one-size-fits-all solutions and the walled garden. So still programmatic, it is right now for me more valuable than other medias that we can buy.
Interesting. And are these similar kind of trends to what you guys are seeing, Zaid and Omar, and what the industry is seeing from your point of view?
Well, from our side, these barriers we were talking about like investment or budget. From our side, I don't see that, because from our side, everything looks still like grabland. There's so much potential. There's still so much going on. So I wouldn't call that a barrier. I do see a barrier, or better said, room for improvement when it comes to the preconceptions on audience construction and customer behavior. What I mean by that is that it's still very common to see advertisers activating their campaigns programmatically with audiences from 2, 5, even 10 or 15 years ago. It's very interesting because their products and services, they innovate as the years pass, but the audiences are still the same, are just preconceived. And if you think about it, last year was crazy. Not only crazy itself, but also crazy fast. Like a lot of things are going on now, a lot of things are changing. Socio-demo aspects that are already enough to reshape audiences. Like, for example, like a lot of people are now, if not already, starting to work hybrid, like sometime at home, sometime in the office, if not totally remote. So what that means for an automotive brand or a motorbike brand, maybe you have to start to think about it. Or I don't know, now talking to friends now is cool to live in the suburbs again now because of the lockdown fatigue. Okay, a flat in the center where all the buses, maybe it's not attractive anymore. Okay, so as a mortgage provider, as a bank, or again, as an automotive, what that means for you. And then let's not forget that we millennials, for the last decade, and I think for the next 2 to come, we are going to still be representing the global purchasing power, meaning we will have to make a lot of decisions based on our values and principles. Values and principles, I mean, sustainability, environment, social consciousness, reducing the gender gap, all those things, we have a lot more consciousness than our parents and grandparents. So again, as a brand, how you react to those new values or new principles from your audience, because it's definitely not the same than 20 years ago. What I'm trying to say, so this was a contest, but what I'm trying to say and my recommendations to advertisers, agencies, regardless if you're doing in-housing or hybrid or purely agency, is to don't take things for granted and lean on tools from whoever you're buying data from or with, every player out there has amazing suite of products, data-driven products that are going to help you for audience discovery and like planning tools for your briefs, or I don't know, lookalike models, customization of your audiences. So my recommendation to everybody is to lean on with your partners, call it a DMP, call it a DSP, call it a publisher if you are buying data from them. Ask them a lot of questions, and also get involved in the construction of the data. I think it's not only fun, but it's also the future of trading. More than crunching numbers, we traders, what we're going to be doing in the future is managing audiences and proving hypotheses all the time. So my recommendation is get involved, ask questions, and yeah, regardless of the model you are using. But we need to be more data-driven, lean on the tools that the partners are providing.
Yeah, really, really interesting point. And Zaid, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I can add to that. I think of all the barriers or issues dominating ad tech discussions, I still feel that transparency is still right on top of the agenda for many buyers. And ultimately, you know, it's about trust. It's about trust in programmatic, trust in vendors, trust in, you know, in emerging channels like CTV and in-app. Overall trust for the industry. I think we all recall Mark Pritchard's now famous speech a few years ago about cleaning up the supply chain and creating a new media age. You know, those words, while it happened a long time ago, it still very much resonates today, you know. And I think the issue of transparency from a SSP perspective has given rise to supply path optimization. Still, you know, buy side is looking to address transparency across their supply chain. So they're not only looking at things like inventory, they're also assessing fee structures. So for buyers, when you're working with your partners, think about every pound or every euro that goes into your ad spend, how much of it actually ends up in media. That's where the conversations on consolidation needs to start. And I think agencies and brands are now re-evaluating their vendor relationships, you know, and they're looking to develop deeper partnerships with fewer trusted partners that can deliver value for them across the chain. I think without transparency, there just can't be trust, like any relationship, right? And without trust, we just can't evolve. And further to someone's point earlier, changes in privacy regulation, shrinking cookie pools, you know, have resulted in brand partnerships centered around trust and transparency, which, you know, can be beneficial for everyone, including consumers as well. But I think aside from that, one of the largest and most positive step changes we've seen in the last few years are the extent of collaboration amongst big industry players. You know, think about the IAB FAQs launched in 2019, IAB Europe Supply Chain Transparency Guide, the ad.text initiatives, sellers.json, IAB Gold Standards. All of these have been put into place to really give brands and advertisers the assurances they need in order to create a much smoother way for investment to reach publishers and monetize their inventory. And I think, you know, the reason trust, transparency will always be on the agenda is because it's ever changing. There's always new challenges we need to be facing as an industry. And, you know, it means many different things to many different people as well.
Yeah, definitely. And in terms of formats that you guys have been testing or investing in through programmatic advertising, I know we did a couple of polls earlier and CTV came out really high. Is that something that you're all looking at? Are there any other formats that you've been investing in or testing? And that's open to all. Omar?
Well, yeah, from our side, yeah, I wanted to give the turn first. So yeah, from our side, CTV is definitely the big piece of the puzzle. Is what almost everybody's talking about, at least the agencies we work with, and everybody really is a central hub. Sometimes we refer to it as the digital fireplace. So that's definitely what more people are having more appetite for that. Let's not forget also audio, which I wouldn't call audio, that is, at least from our side, it's not like in a testing phase, because we've been more than a year and a half already having campaigns activated with audio, but I wouldn't call it a mature channel yet. So CTV and audio, I think they are start to scale a little bit more. But what is more interesting here in Spain in 2021, all of a sudden, it seems that as soon as vaccines started to be mentioned and articles that certain regions in Spain here is starting to loosen up the restrictions, digital out of home, bam, exploded. Like suddenly agencies were asking us a lot of questions to our client services team just to get more educated and start to include it in the briefs for the brands they represent. And it just happened in a matter of 3 months. It's definitely, that's in testing phase. That's definitely in testing phase because still we don't have a lot of advertisers doing that. It's not considered as a part of every omni-channel programmatic brief, but the appetite that is generating is massive. So yeah, those three I would say that are more the most innovative we have come across.
Interesting.
I'll go. Yeah, CTV definitely. I think everyone is jumping on the CTV bandwagon. It is certainly a growing area, and I think it's probably one of the biggest opportunities we've seen for a long time. You know, buying behavior is also changing. I think buyers are, you know, keen to shift. Buyers are keen to shift budgets into CTV because they can see this is where audiences are migrating to. Although it's not necessarily a complete shift from linear into CTV, but you know, people are definitely combining their viewing. If you think about channel hopping from Netflix to Prime, you know, linear TV, or even dual screening across social while watching perhaps a football match, as an example. And I think this has certainly impacted how buyers are thinking about planning for CTV, and they're looking to probably view this more as a complement to linear TV, which will always be, you know, the best medium for mass communication, right? But I don't think it's clear for everyone still on how to buy CTV. I think we've barely scratched the surface though in terms of what programmatic can deliver, both from a monetization standpoint and user experience. And one of the things that Pubmatic is purely focused on is really, you know, bringing our header bidding technology into the OTT and CTV space, and to see how we can make changes and bring some of the successes we've seen in other channels into this new platform. But COVID has also definitely changed how agencies and brands are planning and buying all of their media. We've recently conducted a CTV study across EMEA, and what was interesting was that agencies seem to be dominating the CTV buying landscape in every major market that we've surveyed, although broadcasters believe that data-driven and measurement in CTV could help open up new opportunities to brand direct conversations that may not have existed before because it may have been inaccessible. And then the other thing is probably in-game advertising. I think it's one of the few growth areas during lockdown, you know, around the world that you know, we've all been spending a lot more time, whether it's on our consoles or whether it's doing casual gaming on our mobile phones, you know. But what's interesting as well is that the current level of investment in-game advertising doesn't really reflect the opportunity, right? There has been an increase in the number of active players, either new ones or previous gamers with no more on their, you know, hands or recognition, their passion. But in gaming, definitely, arguably one of the world's, you know, favorite form of entertainment, generating more revenue than TV, film, or music, according to the WARC, which is quite interesting. You know, there's more programmatic inventory out there than ever, and I think buyers, brands, planners need to reach the consumers where they are, essentially.
Yeah, I think that's really key, and they are everywhere, aren't they?
Yeah.
So we've touched upon this like throughout the day so far, and it's another question about the post third-party cookie era. So are you prepared for this post-cookie apocalypse, or and if so, what strategies do you have in place?
Look, scalable audience addressability is absolutely critical for success in digital advertising, because without it, we won't be able to attribute, track, or optimize our campaigns. And we think, now really is the time for publishers and advertisers to define their strategy and their roadmap for targeting and engaging audiences in a much more compliant and brand safe way that doesn't compromise user experience. It's happening right now. So brands need to jump on board, join the party, or miss out altogether. I think, three of the main options available that we've seen is, matched first party data for bringing addressability to digital, or post-apocalyptic cookie world, universal identifiers, which we all talking about, as well as browser-based audiences, i.e. contextual-based targeting. I think it's important that we think about each type of targeting throughout the purchase funnel and really how that relates to omni-channel measurement and optimization as well. At Pubmatic, we are encouraging advertisers, brands, and publishers to experiment with identity and data solutions, really to test the efficacy of each strategy within each channel, right? And some of the tools that we've now brought to market are things like Pubmatic's Identity Hub. We've created the hub really to give publishers the flexibility to be able to manage multiple identity partners when executing their campaigns, right? And they'll be able to curate ID solutions really to drive scale needed for buyers to reach their desired target audiences through whichever ID partner that is for them, right? So this is currently built within our header bidding wrapper solution, which is built on pre-bid. Identity does, at the moment, in terms of the number of partners, by default, we have more than a dozen identity solutions. So all of your LiveRamp, Load2Me, ID5, ZeoTap, etc. is available. And publishers that have identity activated can start to develop and really start to experiment with their different identity strategies by implementing, things like A/B tests, just to test which ID partner could be the most effective for them.
Right.
Sorry, go on.
No, carry on.
Okay, yeah, and then from a buyer's perspective, they can create things like PMP deals with Pubmatic's unique ID targeting to help improve personalized ad experiences to consumers in a much safer brand, privacy first and brand safe environment. And then the other thing we're working on is Pubmatic's Audience Encore. And this is really an audience data platform, right? On the SSP, on the supply side, designed to improve the way marketers and data owners transact audience data by giving them more control to deliver much better outcomes and ROI across their executions, right? So they can do things like onboard first-party data. If they've got offline CRM data, they can upload that and also use, third-party or second-party data to curate marketplaces for them. Yeah, so this is really good. And then the last piece is contextual targeting. I mentioned earlier. So we pass IAB contextual categories and page language in the bid request through to curate PMPs. So publishers can essentially gain deeper insights and much greater transparency across their executions.
Great. Well, you're well prepared by the sounds of it. So, and in terms of Omar, from your side, DSP, how have you guys prepared?
Well, we have solution, and this is important, very important, in collaboration with other experts in the industry. I'm quoting Tanya from the previous panel. It is super important. I mean, the solution is called Unify ID 2.0. If you want to dig more, you can contact any Traders employee or even look in Google and find information about it. But that's not important piece. Yes, we have a solution, but what is important, and also what you should remember and take from this, is that it's a solution that is based on identity, and it fosters industry-wide collaboration, as Tanya was mentioning before. There are many solutions. There's still not the one that is going to rule them all. but it's important to understand that we need collaboration in the industry to make it work. Another important pillar of this solution, of this strategy, or as you call it, is that it puts back the user in the center. So the user is going to be responsible for adapting the privacy levels that it's going to have. And another one is that it preserves the quid pro quo of the open internet. Like it always was like that. I don't think a lot of people are conscious, family, friends, etc. But it was always like that. It was free, amazing content and quality journalism in exchange of relevant targeted ads, and fueled by anonymous aggregated data. It always has been that way. So this solution recognizes that, and it recognizes also a very important point. And this is my last take. I'm not going to get too technical because I would like also Moritz and Anna to give their take, but I would like to, and sorry, Tanisha, for not calling this an apocalypse, because an apocalypse is something unexpected. This was meant to happen. This was going to happen. If you think about it, not only the number of devices where we consume content is increasing versus laptops, etc., but also the minutes that we are spending consuming content is also increasing. So these cookie-less devices like digital out of home or exterior panels, or smart TVs, audio, etc., all these are cookie-less, and these will be ending up absorbing the devices or the content that comes from cookie-based devices. So yeah, I think it's not an apocalypse. It's something that was meant to happen. It's just the announcement made people work a little bit faster than they were expecting to do. But yeah, don't panic. And definitely there are a lot of players working on this and different initiatives, SSPs, DSPs, everybody's willing to tell their story. Whoever you're working with, go and ask them, get educated yourself, tell them to educate you in whatever identity solution they are working on, regardless of who you're working with.
Yeah, definitely not an apocalypse, an evolution. I've got a couple of audience questions for Zaid. Why is it so vital to support an open ad supported web over walled gardens?
Right, I'll keep it short. I think consumer privacy and control are critical components for a healthy and sustainable open internet. And I think developing, first-party connections between publisher, advertiser, and consumers has been a key part of Pubmatic's approach to post-cookie addressability. And, it's further validated by Google's latest announcement as well. We think that this move may actually help to accelerate publishers' response to third-party cookie deprecation, right? And it will benefit advertisers who are increasingly seeking to diversify their spend away from the walled gardens without really losing that, personalization in their campaigns. And I think this represents quite a significant opportunity for the open internet around, user experience and consumer choice.
Fab. I think we run out of time now. So thank you all so much for answering all my questions. It's a great panel.
Pleasure.
And I'll hand it over to David.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Tanisha, and thank you to the panel. I really enjoyed that session. It was great to hear the advertiser's perspective and also obviously the ad tech. Just before we move on to our final panel of the day, I'd like to share one last poll with you on what you feel are the key barriers to adoption of the programmatic trading. This should be on your screen now. There you go. Just whilst we wait for the results, I think it's really interesting to learn that the barriers faced with programmatic are very similar to the rest of the industry for advertisers, and the transparency and control are very much key to ensuring its success. This is another topic that we'll be covering in IAB Europe's Attitudes Towards Programmatic survey, which we said will be released to the market for response in the next month or so. So keep a lookout for that, and I'll be really keen to hear. And your feedback and response here is critical. As we know, this is an industry where we must continue to work together on. And I should say, I hope the results are in. I think they should be on our screen now. There we go. So what you consider to be the key barriers in the adoption of programmatic trading, difficulty in hiring people is up there with difficulty in understanding technology requirements, but the winner would be difficulty in keeping up with changing technology, and there's a significant amount of information there. If you want to learn more about the changing ecosystem and changing technology, please do visit IAB Europe's website. There's multiple things. We'll talk about that a little bit after our next panel. But now on to our final session, and this will be covering some of the complexity highlighted in that poll. This will be data protection and policy for the programmatic advertising industry. And we welcome Ninon Wagner, Privacy and Compliance Manager for IAB Europe. And then I will lead the next panel of experts in a discussion to explore what the overall sharing of data really means, and will outline the latest policy developments, including e-privacy, that industry must be aware of. So over to you, Ninon.
Thank you, David. So for this discussion related to the recent privacy regulatory and technical updates and latest policy development in the EU, I am joined by 4 speakers who have great expertise in privacy and knowledge of the European Data Protection Framework. So we are going to start with a short roundtable to let them introduce themselves and their companies. Beatrice, would you like to start?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Beatrice Bari. I am the VP of Global Data and the Privacy Officer at DoubleVerify.
Erdem, over to you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Erdem, and I'm working as a team lead of account management programmatic in AdColony.
Florian?
Hi, guys. I'm Florian. I'm one of the managing directors at Zeotap and responsible for a global ID Plus initiative, and also responsible for the global data partner business, as well as publisher and platforms business, and also our legal and privacy practice. That's why I'm here today.
And finally, Lawrence.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Lawrence, I'm a solutions engineer here at OneTrust, focusing on our preference choice offering, which essentially is everything about consent on your different digital properties.
Thank you, and thank you to all of you for being here. So just before we start, I just want to remind everyone there will be Q&A at the end of the session. So do not hesitate to enter any question you may have, and we will go through them at the end. So let's start first with a retrospective of what has happened in the past years on the regulatory front. So we are almost 3 years after GDPR came into force, yet there has been a number of case laws and DPA guidelines this past year that clarified its interpretation, and some of them have been quite impactful for the advertising industry. Lawrence, OneTrust operates a consent management platform that is used by many publishers in the EU. What have been the most important regulatory developments in your opinion, and how did you adapt your product?
Yeah, I'm going to go with the CNIL's most recent changes that took force from the 1st of April. The French market is something that's close to my heart. I also speak French, so I may be biased with this one, but it's something that's impacted us greatly, and we've had to add in a number of different elements to product to help manage that, and also work with our clients to make sure that they could update their CMPs to include things like the continue without accepting button, although not a requirement under that, but it was something that the CNIL had given as a suggestion of how the CMP could be delivered to users. And so it's just been a continued sort of last couple of months of a lot of work of making sure that we were working with everyone, making sure that everything was in place and that everyone understood what they needed to do and how this was going to impact business and what it was going to do to things like opt-in rates and etc. Moving from implicit consent to a very much explicit consent for everyone. Yeah.
Thanks. And Erdem, what ruling caught your attention recently? Because there has been lots of scrutiny on the web environment, especially with regard to cookies. So how does it translate for the mobile app environment?
Actually, the Planet 49 was very impactful for our in-app solution because, yeah, it's always on the industry. They are talking about the cookies in there, but also it's about the permissions, and you have to focus on the opt-in rates of your publishers. And also for last maybe 6 months, we were working on that, and it was very impactful for us because, of course, in the in-app solutions too, our advertisers clients would like to just reach the right people and right target audiences, and we also had that target audience based device IDs and the data's not opt-in, just opt-out. And after the Planet 49 and the similars, of course, we needed to change the structure on the internal side, and right now we are working with several publishers, and actually it was a massive just workload to work with them on the SDK levels, and we needed to change the technical stuffs. And yeah, after the cookie world, actually on the in-app side, it doesn't affect our solution so much, but of course, like Planet 49, they just improve the impact of the permissions. They affected us so much, yeah. But right now we are jumping on that.
Thanks. And Florian, same question for you at the OTAP. The Planet 49 ruling also confirmed that the e-privacy directive applies in Germany, although it's not transposed in national law. Has it impacted your operation as a German-based company?
Yeah, so as you said, right, certainly a special one for us being a German company, but we're actually active across the European Union as well. So being also a company actually dealing with partners who actually share data with us, right, for different use cases, consent and actually the way consent is being obtained has been a key measure for us and a key topic, right? We're consulting our partners, we're working with them closely to actually make them compliant and ensure that the data we are processing from our clients, from our partners, is always following the current rules, right? If you're looking at Planet 49, what does this mean? It ultimately clarified the aspect of explicit consent, right? We saw that beforehand, the e-privacy directive just said valid consent, right? And now with the ruling and the clear interpretation of the Planet 49 judgment or ruling, we actually saw that explicit consent is required, right? And what this actually means. And that also the GDPR in relation to e-privacy is directly applicable. And actually it took away a lot of uncertainty, and it really helped the German market, we believe, to accelerate, right? Adoption, we saw publishers changing actually their consent notices in a rush almost. And for us, this was actually a very positive thing because it gave the market clarity. It allowed partners like ourselves actually to work with them now, that kind of like this general aspect or concept of consent and explicit consent has been adopted.
Thanks. And Beatrice, how do you approach this scrutiny on ad tech compliance in the EU at company level? And do you think that there are common learnings to draw from all of these recent regulatory developments?
Yeah, for DoubleVerify being a cookieless solution that does not require a large amount of data, if at all, a lot of these rulings have just been the kind of thing that we pay attention to, but have not affected our operations. I think one of the more interesting ones for me personally was the Grindr decision, just because among the interesting things that came out of that decision was a fine that many thought might be unrelated to the company's revenues, which was an interesting aspect. The fact that it was a confirmation of the need for consent for data sharing, which I think most people logically assumed, especially in the context of Grindr and the kind of information that an app like that would have. I felt like it was more of a confirmation, not necessarily a ton of new information for the market. What I thought was really interesting was the investigations that came out of that decision on the companies that were receiving the data, because I think it sort of raises the question again of to what degree is someone receiving data responsible for another controller or another company. I think that the law is relatively clear as to your level of responsibility for your processors. But when you're receiving data from a controller, I think it's interesting that numerous investigations resulted from that decision, just because I think in a way, it could raise the bar for all of us. And I think it poses the challenge of, any one company works with hundreds of other companies, and it's really hard then to coordinate everyone's interpretation of the law and everyone's preferences. So I thought that that was an interesting decision. And as a company that works with a lot of really large tech companies, that's all, and us being on the smaller side, that's always a challenge, right? Coordinating everyone's perception and understanding of the law with our own compliance framework is probably one of the biggest challenges we have.
Thanks. And yeah, you talk about perception and different interpretation of the law. And what another aspect impacting as well the industry are the discrepancies in GDPR interpretation by DPAs, which remains a pain point for most companies in the industry, especially when they operate across markets. In practice, Lawrence, do you observe lots of regional differences in the way user transparency is provided and consent obtained by publisher using your CMP?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a very difficult subject. I think it's going to be one of those things that if this continues to happen, if interpretation of GDPR continues to fragment and there's different rules for everyone, it's going to be incredibly difficult for small, medium enterprises, companies that don't have large legal teams to understand exactly what they need to do in each of those. It's sort of to the point where not wanting to pitch or anything, but we have an entire part of our product that helps with that problem because it's a problem. And saying that, you need to have specific rules for France where you can only store your consent cookie for 6 months versus other places within Europe where that isn't a requirement, that coincidentally also is in Ireland. So it just, yeah, I guess it's a really difficult one where sort of little things get added and little things get changed here and there for each data protection authority. And I think it's going to be a growing challenge if that carries on, and especially for those smaller businesses where they don't have people to research this and make sure that everything is always up to date all of the time.
Thanks. And Adam, what are the challenges for a vendor operating across market in the EU?
I'm totally agree on the just lack of employment on the legal acknowledge, because on the especially for the small companies, it's a very huge trouble that they don't have maybe they acknowledge on the legal issues too much, and they don't have teams for that. And also from the supply side, we have a challenge that tell our clients the legal issues about the other regions. For example, we are working for all EMEA and Latin America, and we have some hubs on the industry, by the way. For example, in Middle East, Dubai is a hub, and they would like to run similar campaigns to different regions on the North Africa and also the GCC countries. And if we have some legal differences between the regions, we have to tell them about that one to agencies and the brands too. And it's also very hard for us on the supply level. So we also have a challenge about telling the differences and also the reasons of the differences. So we think that we need to just stabilize that one for both supply side and also the demand side too.
Yeah, and Florian, do you think that this is just the adoption curve and there will be more uniform and consistent interpretation of the law in the future?
Actually, yeah, I would like to take a bit more of a positive perspective on this, right? We have also lived in a while actually before GDPR was effective, and we have seen how different actually regulations in Europe could be, right? And we employed actually large forces of lawyers in each of the markets to ultimately understand and interpret the local laws. With GDPR, first of all, right, we actually introduced not a global, but a European framework, which really helped to simplify things. Of course, right, now actually individual regulators in the markets are kind of like starting to interpret more closely and actually more in a detailed way, which is, I would say, a normal learning curve, right? We're getting to new standards, and ultimately these are reactions to local developments, right? And what is a positive, I think, is that actually the regulators from the different markets look at each other and actually copy and adopt new standards there. And that is a process. Of course, it's painful in between, and of course, it means complexity. If you look at it from a different angle, it also means an entry barrier, right? For companies like us, being a European first company, it actually helps us to better understand the markets than other potentially multinational companies coming also from the US and other markets and is ultimately delivering a competitive advantage, I guess, to us.
Yeah, and the EDPB is a big part of making sure that the interpretation is consistent. Although no, it's not, well, the UK is not part of the EDPB anymore, and it has transposed the GDPR in national law, and the adequacy decision is currently on the table, but there might still be differences in the legal regimes in the future. Beatrice, are you concerned about the UK framework being ultimately different than in the EEA?
You know, I'm always a big believer, sort of like Florian, and on the bright side, I think that there's considerable market forces that will encourage the UK to stick to a more beaten path when it comes to their own choices. It's a little bit, you know, I remember back in the day during all of the Brexit debates where everybody was like, oh my God, there's going to be a different standard for cars. So you'll be able to sell a car in the UK, but not in Europe, or vice versa. And I remember one example about the regulations for pillows that the Brexit campaign was really clinging to, saying, see, Europe wants to regulate pillows, which is very important for your neck and posture. But I think, you know, we see that in the United States with California. California is always sort of the outlier with decisions, and everyone's like, oh my God, we're going to have to cater to California. And that never comes to pass. We don't actually cater our lives to California. So I feel like at the end of the day, the UK will be encouraged on a general strategy to stick close to the market that they engage with the most, which I think is going to be the European market long term. So I think that's definitely one force in that direction. The other thing that I think can't be ignored is that the other big market for the UK is the United States, and the United States is moving in the direction of stronger privacy laws. So everybody is rowing sort of in the same direction, a little bit disparately. I think what's really interesting, it's funny that, you know, I agree with Florian that there's a lot of bright side to it. I also tend to be sort of positive about things. And the way I see it, having been on most of my life on the side of the smaller vendors, I actually like it when DPAs come out with decisions, even if there's 27 different decisions in Europe for every country in the European Union. It's fewer than the clients that I have. So if I have decisions from a DPA that interprets something, and a client is trying to push me in a different direction, I can always say, look, this is the guidance that the DPA has provided. This is what we're going to stick to. Insofar as your compliance is concerned, I'm completely respectful of yours, but for us, this is what we're going to do. And now I have someone legitimizing that approach that is, you know, the entity that makes that decision. So I feel like you can look at the bright side with it. And then as a small vendor, I think most of us live in the world of strictest common denominators, right? Like I have lived my entire life saying, okay, who's got the strictest requirement? Let's just go with that. And if we can make exceptions for more flexible ones and it's operationally feasible, that's what we will do. But if we can't, this is the most scalable, most efficient way for us to comply with all the requirements, and that's what it is. So, you know, it's definitely not an ideal world, but to Florian's point, it's like more ideal than it was before, and it's not anything different. 209 sovereign nations and 200,000 different privacy laws. Not terrified.
Thanks. Let's now move to the current technical challenges that are driven by privacy objectives. So they disrupt how the industry operates, this time in a consistent way. So first with Apple's app tracking transparency feature that has been released on iOS. What has been the impact of this new prompt for publishers? And what are the alternatives when the IDFA is no longer available?
Actually, we were working for that maybe just for the last 1 year, and we have several publisher partners for each market, and also they have just worked a lot about that. And yeah, we have some solutions about that, but first of the story, we needed to find and to understand all the technical solutions that Apple also just gave us, the SCAD network. And also we were working on it on the SCAD network, and according to the ATD and the banning of IDFA. Right now we're working with our publishers to increase our opt-in data, and also we're tracking how the trend is going right now, and they started to just get the permissions to the users directly. But also the first party data is very important in here, and as a network, actually we have an advantage for that, because we have our direct SDK, and just after the IDFA, some of the ad networks that they have mostly reseller of the inventory could be affected, because they couldn't get the data, and even if they have, the publisher has the opt-in data, they couldn't reach that. So that could be a trouble, and also it could be pushed to some companies that create their own SDK, or if they have, they will try to penetrate the publishing inventory to increase their SDK penetration. And right now on the mobile in-app world, as a supply side platform, we are working to increase and also to follow how to opt-in data is going on. And yes, it depends on, by the way, the effect depends on the region too, because you know that we have also the Android inventory too. So in some regions also Android has a very huge penetration, and yes, in that regions we don't have any changes on the ground, but yeah, especially in Europe and also the US, we had some effects, and with that regions especially, we are still working with the publishers to increase the permissions and opt-in data, and also we are trying to make it wider and make it a little bit more special, because before that one we had the interest data and we have some classifications, and right now we are starting the story again, and with the contextual also we are supporting that with the publisher team. So it just pushed us to work with publishers more than before about the targeting and about the data classification. And yes, from the supply side, updates are like that.
Thanks. And Lawrence, how this new feature is handled by app publishers? So how can this prompt articulate with their own consent mechanism, which remain in fact necessary to gather user choices about their personal data, irrespective that the IDFA is no longer available?
Yeah, so I think there's two parts. I mean, there's the part where we still have to have all of our CMP appearing under, as we had the requirement for before. We've also got that requirement where if we're going to do any targeted advertising or try and reuse that person's data across different apps, we're going to also have to request IDFA. And I think really the biggest impact it's going to have is on that user experience of users now seeing too many pop-ups. I saw like a little anecdote the other day where someone clicked on a link because it was an article they were interested in, and they got to the article and they had to accept alerts and notifications, and then they had to sign up to an email newsletter, and then they had to accept cookies. And it can end up being quite bad in terms of user experience if we have all of these pop-ups. What we're trying to look at doing and trying to end up being better, some of the options that are there are, number one, testing banners. A/B testing would be the first place to go to just see what kind of banners you can end up having that will have the least impact on a user's actual experience, detrimental in any case. But also maybe look at things like having certain pages where you've got a very clear call to action, not have a consent banner. Obviously, we can't collect various information based on consent from that point. It would have to wait for a further point in the user journey. But maybe if there's a very clear landing page with a call to action that we've already got, we only want one of those. We don't want to then throw up a banner there in place as well. The other bit will be, I think, in terms of how to improve this, is going to be looking at things like authenticated consent, storing consent in the back end for a known user, and making sure that if a user goes through different steps, that we can collect and use that consent they've already given, rather than presenting them the same banners multiple different times, so that when I go onto the website, I can accept cookies and accept tracking in that sense. And then when I go onto the app, well, I'm not seeing that now, because I'm on iPhone, I'm not seeing that, but I am going to see the IDFA prompt still. But so we're contextually building that as we go, rather than just bombarding all of those in one go, I think is going to be really where things will have to improve to make sure that we still have good user experience and make sure we don't have that sort of bombardment of different elements on the page.
And so, Beatrice, there is a clear misalignment between the role of the end user agent and the role of the publishers when it comes to obtain users' consent. And ultimately, this leads to the very fragmented and confusing user experience that Lawrence just described. How do you see this evolve, and who should have the ownership over user-facing components?
Yeah, you know, I think that every time there's an evolution in either the collection technology or the law, which usually do not happen at the same time, one comes way before the other. I'm going to let you guys guess which. But when that happens, there's always sort of an adjustment period. And then at some point down the line, a consensus forms over how things are to happen. Or one of the bigger players makes an executive decision about how we're all going to be moving forward, acting moving forward, like Apple did with IDFA, or Google decided to do with Chrome and cookies. I think, in the world of CTV, for example, in the past panel, everybody was talking about how it's the next big opportunity and how, we expect that to grow. I think we're still in its infancy, so there's still a lot of debate, right? I think CTVs are more static than a lot of other devices that we've experienced in the past few years. As it always happens in the industry, there's always sort of like an up and down. Like we went from desktops to laptops to smartphones, so moving towards the mobile concept, and now we're sort of like going back to more static concepts around the Internet of Things. Most of the Internet of Things are in your house. So they're not going around anywhere. I think that lends itself to position the manufacturers of the devices to be closer to the user. So, and to be better positioned to predict where the user might be, because my smartphone travels with me. So I could be in Italy. I'm originally from Italy, so I could be in Italy visiting my family next week. Maybe not next week, but at some point. And I could be in the US today. So that creates a lot of challenges in figuring out what level of consent I might require together, since it's unpredictable where my smartphone might be. I think with a CTV, it's a little bit more predictable. Not a lot of people bring their 60-inch TV across the world. Sure, some people do. But I think that definitely will be a factor in the decision. But at the end of the day, I think it's a situation in flux, and Lawrence and his team will figure out how to get consent when everybody figures it out, and the rest of us will sort of like travel in that direction once the big decision is made. I think for a lot of vendors, you're sort of sitting on the sideline waiting to see what happens and trying to stay ahead of the curve if you can, or just be on the same train if that's more feasible.
And another topic, of course, talking about end user agent, is the deprecation of third-party cookies by Chrome, and the alternatives that are currently being discussed. Florian, can you give us an overview maybe of the different solutions, and what are, in your opinion, the alternatives that will gain the largest adoption between identity solution, publisher-provided IDs, or the privacy sandbox APIs?
Yeah, thanks for directing this question to me. It's actually something, we've been working on for the last 18 months, right? With Zeotap and our ID Plus solution, we started out actually building an authenticated solution, which is ultimately using logged-in users to connect them in the future without cookies. But of course, right, the industry and the world will be much more complex. We cannot only look at one small piece of the puzzle, right, which would be authenticated solutions, but there's much more. And if you, maybe to make it easy, right, to put it in a pyramid, there are actually different layers of this pyramid. And at the top, there's just very small scale, but high quality, right? And this is ultimately, that's the authenticated game as we see it today. Because users are not logging in at scale yet, right? Publishers who achieve 20 to 40% logins are really well off. Of course, the industry is headed towards this, right? And is really using 2021 to develop strategies, to develop actually paywall, maybe just login walls, maybe soft logins, right? Ultimately nudging users to authenticate themselves or identify themselves in different ways. Still, right, this is going to be a smaller piece of the pyramid. As a second layer, you have the cohort-based solutions, or you could say privacy sandbox concepts, right? Where ultimately Google is pushing the industry, or the industry should be collaborating on this, right? To ultimately develop solutions as an alternative to cookies, which should be more privacy compliant. As we all know, that's not yet being tested in Europe. So we don't know yet when we'll ultimately get there, but still this is certainly something which will be part of the future, right? And as said, it's not only cookies anymore, it's already two technologies, right? And then of course, there's the third aspect of contextual. And contextual targeting has always been around. It's certainly being more and more professionalized, I would say, or automated in certain ways. And this is also something there to stay, right? But now you're going down the funnel, or not even funnel, a pyramid. And at the bottom right, you have big scale, because contextual you can get almost anywhere, but you're going down from a quality perspective. And some solutions, right? And if you're just looking to actually target a certain behavior or context of people, that might be enough. But if you're invested as a brand in actually highly complex data analytics projects, right, to figure out which are your user groups who are prone to churn next, then you want to reach exactly that group, right? And that's actually where solutions such as authenticated ID Plus solutions are coming in, right? And ultimately are the only option in the future to connect you to, or deterministically connect you to audiences on the publisher side in the same way walled gardens are able to do that. So, and ultimately, right, if you look at these three elements, of course, they are the walled gardens, and to a certain degree, they're being strengthened. And that's in our other side of the business, right, where our customer intelligence platform connects you to all these different aspects of the advertising ecosystem and allows an advertiser to ultimately choose and mix these different channels, right, to join the user through in the entire journey.
And Laurence, what role can take CMPs in this new landscape? Can they be combined with sign-on component, for example, to support the identity solution that Florian mentioned?
Yeah, I think that could tie very well into that idea of authenticated consent. If we've got an identifier for someone and we know who they are, we know their device, or their user ID typically would be, from our point of view, as a CMP, we're kind of agnostic over what the ID is. But those kind of solutions are perfect because we can say, oh, we know this person's the same user, they've given us the consent, we can pass that over through the different domains or different digital properties in general that they're moving through.
Let's move now to the recent policy development because we have only 5 minutes to go. So first with the e-privacy regulation. So last February, the Council agreed on its version of the text and the final negotiation should start at the end of May. Beatrice, is this finally moving in the right decision? Is replacing the e-privacy directive with a more up-to-date regulation is essential for the industry?
Yeah, I mean, I think you'd be hard pressed to find someone who would say, you know what, let's keep the e-privacy directive. I like that one better. The law is from like the 90s. So the internet was a very different place. I think it's pretty common for technology to evolve at a different pace than the law, but in this specific instance, I think we've probably waited a little bit too long with replacing this law. I think GDPR in a way complicated things because it created similar but separate standards for the processing of the same data. So it creates a lot of complication. It's actually an aspect that I spend a lot of my time working on because Double Verify's processing is legitimate interest based. We're cookie free, but we do some level of pseudonymous information tracking. It's very, very distant from identifying who the person is, but under the law, it is personal information. But it is based on legitimate interest, and the e-privacy directive really complicates our lives because it creates separate and differing standards that just in a way of overcomplicate the situation. And the draft of the e-privacy regulation that we have now actually addresses a lot of these concerns head on. You know, fraud elimination is addressed head on. Whether or not cookie walls, paywalls for data tracking are legal is addressed head on. So I think it is an improvement. You know, when the GDPR got to this stage, it still took 18 months and then 2 years for it to become enforceable. So I don't have high hopes that 4 years from now, the internet will be the place that it is today. I'm still holding out hope for flying cars. But, you know, I do think at this point, any improvement is good because right now we're getting tied down with regulations that are regulations is a technical term, but with mandates and laws that are technical interpretation of a law that wasn't designed to deal with the world of today. And I think that complicates the situation a lot. I do think my hope is that the e-privacy regulation will somewhat, maybe unexpectedly, simplify things for at least some players. I know it would for me, so I would definitely welcome it.
And so one last question for Florian before we wrap up. And you also share Beatrice's view, which is quite positive about the latest text. Is it sufficiently strong to support the ad-funded business of certain publishers? Also in light of the Parliament's position, with some MEPs suggesting a ban on targeted advertising?
Yeah, I think at least, I mean, first of all, I actually second the assessment that this is going to be a while until we'll see it in effect, right? And at the moment, I think some of the early timelines are looking applicability not before 2025. So there is actually still some time to go. And already, if you're looking at the draft right now, it's all about cookies, right? And the interesting thing is you just discussed or mentioned it, the depreciation of cookies is happening next year. So we are already looking at a draft, right, which at least doesn't differentiate between third-party and first-party cookies, or what is actually meant there. So we are seeing that regulation is lagging behind, right, the reality in technology. That is just a fact. It's always been, right? But we need to make sure that this regulation now at least hits a few of the important elements. And I would actually agree that many of the, let's say, common topics at the moment in the industry are at least addressed. And yeah, if they're going to be solved, right, in the, let's say, political discourse of trying to find compromise, will be interesting to see. I think it's too early to say. At the moment, at least elements such as, and I'm just picking one, right, having a very clear accept or decline, right, ruling on how actually I agree as a user, right, and potentially then also having more clarity on how actually consent mechanisms need to be designed as a general rule, right, or also having the general browser-based whitelisting of certain cookie types, right, to make it easier for users not always have to click on a cookie banner, but not ultimately kind of like fight this fatigue, right, of cookie banners, and then rather decide on certain actions which are actually relevant for the user. These are good things, right, and they can actually be quite valuable for the industry if they're being done right, and that is something I think for all of us to wait on.
Yeah, so definitely something to monitor. I think that we can now close this panel because we are slightly over time and I see no question from the audience. So thank you again, Beatrice, and Florian and Lawrence for your insight and expertise on the topic. I will now hand over to David to close today's event.
Thank you very much, Ninon, and all the panelists. It was a fantastic panel, and I'm sure many of our audience had lots of takeaways there. It sounds like we have a really interesting and uncertain future ahead of us with regards to privacy, but it is clearly the reason why we need to stay plugged into this topic as much as possible. Well, we're almost there at the end of the 2021 H1 Virtual Programmatic Day, and what event it has been. We've had a lot of attendees, and we'll get a final number out there to this event, which is just incredible. I want to thank our sponsors again today for today's event, AdColony and OneTrust Preference Choice. You know, without your valuable support, it wouldn't have been possible to put on this event. So thank you. And I would like to thank all of our panelists and moderators for giving up their time, sharing their knowledge and views on the important topics that were discussed and debated today. I'm sure many of our attendees will have taken away an idea or more away that can be improved or can be used to improve their own business. I'd also like to thank Helen Massad and Lauren Wakefield from IAB Europe for putting together and delivering yet another successful Virtual Programmatic Day. The event recording will be available on IAB Europe's website over the next few days. And IAB Europe has a lot of other resources related to programmatic, from white papers, guides to 101 videos. So check out the Knowledge Hub on IABEurope.eu. The next Virtual Programmatic Day will take place in November, so be sure to keep an eye out for more information later this year. As mentioned at the beginning of the event, all of our speakers from IAB Europe are all of our speakers for today's event were IAB Europe member companies. If you'd like to find out more about membership, please contact Helen or Lauren. IAB Europe also has a range of other upcoming virtual events and webinars, including our flagship event, Interact, which will take place on the 25th to 27th of May. This year, Interact will be online, spanning 3 days of epic content. We'll cover industry initiatives, policy, data protection, and standards and frameworks, as we drive into how this fits into Digital New Deal and help secure a sustainable future for digital advertising. We have a stellar lineup of speakers confirmed for each day, so please do head over to IAB Europe's website and register to secure your space today. And finally, thank you to all of you, the attendees, for tuning in. Without your support and interest, we wouldn't have a Virtual Programmatic Day. Thank you one last time and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.